In the spring of 2009, 72-year-old Prox Sanchez was having trouble hearing and also experiencing earaches. A hearing specialist sent him to get an MRI. Just after the scan started, Prox felt an excruciating pain under his right eye. Meanwhile, the technician stopped the test, saying that they were experiencing interference from the metal in his head. Prox was puzzled. He didn't have any metal in his head, or so he thought. The doctors looked at an older CT scan of Prox's head and were shocked to find something metal the size of a toothpick in the images. While leaving the doctor's office, Prox suddenly coughed up a 1-inch nail. The giant magnet in the MRI machine had dislodged a nail that was stuck in Prox's sinus cavity, sending it down his throat. Doctors thought he might have had the nail stuck in his head for 30 years. The doctors also told Prox when he sniffed up the nail, membrane tissue probably formed around it. The nail might have stayed there forever without the MRI. Although Prox did carpentry, he was bewildered as to how he got a nail up his nose without noticing it. Some very odd and disturbing things have been found in the human body, quite often by medical professionals. Before we go any further, let's discuss what this video is not about. Human beings sometimes have unusual, shall we say, inclinations, which can lead to needing medical assistance to remove items from the lower part of their intestinal system. As many medical professionals who work in an emergency room can tell you, some patients seem to have carefully thought out explanations where somehow they accidentally fell on various objects and those items got stuck. They're visiting the hospital for a rectal foreign body removal procedure because they're unable to remove the item on their own. Frankly, we could spend a whole video discussing this topic, but there are many forum discussions and X-ray pictures online that give veracity to such anecdotes. However, we have provided a short list called From the Internet of items which have been removed during medical exams or, in some cases, emergency surgery. Admittedly, most of these items aren't disturbing as of themselves. It's only when you think where they were found the disturbing factor comes into play. Barbie doll, Buzz Lightyear action figure, candle, candy cane, carrot, cell phone, champagne flute, cucumber, egg, eggplant, flashlight, fork, golf ball, impulse body spray perfume glass bottle, jar of instant coffee, jar of peanut butter, key, knife, light bulb, long-necked glass soda bottle, orange, pen, pepper shaker, ping pong ball, pint glass, plastic bowling pin, potato, salad tongs, salt shaker, screwdriver, shot glass, toothbrush, toy car, turnip, wine cork, zucchini. Now that we've settled that, who feels like sushi? In February of 2012, the Journal of Parasitology published a report on a 63-year-old Korean woman who experienced severe needle-like pain in her mouth while eating a dish of parboiled squid. She immediately spat the squid out, but it was too late. Upon examination by a doctor, 12 squid spermatophores were found to have implanted themselves into the mucous membrane of the woman's tongue, cheek, and gingiva. The parasites were promptly removed along with some of the woman's damaged oral tissues. Apparently, internal organs including the sperm bag weren't removed from the squid before meal preparation. A game played by some kids in India almost had deadly consequences for one of the players. In 2012, 12-year-old Anil Barela of Madhya Pradesh was messing around with some friends at a local river. The kids dared one another to swallow live fish. Anil took on the challenge. However, instead of going down Anil's esophagus, the 3.5-inch fish slipped down his windpipe and entered his left lung. Anil began to have trouble breathing and was rushed to the local hospital. The doctors measured the oxygen level in Anil's blood at 80%, 18 points lower than a normal 98%. An X-ray showed Anil's left lung as completely opaque due to the foreign object lodged in it. Doctors performed an emergency bronchoscopy and inserted a cable into Anil's lungs. The camera showed that the fish was still alive. Doctors then performed a 45-minute procedure to remove the fish. Anil made a full recovery. Planning on sticking to vegetables now? In another food-related mishap in the summer of 2010, 75-year-old retired schoolteacher Ron Svenden felt terrible. He was chronically fatigued, had lost his appetite, and frequently had coughing spells. A lifelong smoker, Ron had been battling emphysema for some time, but with the sudden turn in his health, he worried that he had cancer. When Ron was rushed to the hospital with a collapsed lung, his x-rays revealed something unusual. There was a 1.5-inch pea sprout growing in his lung. Much like Anil, doctors thought that while eating peas, one simply went down the wrong pipe and lodged in Ron's lung instead of ending up in his stomach. Ron was relieved to find out that he didn't have cancer and was also amazed. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten fresh peas either. Apparently, when a pea germinates, it simply needs a warm, wet place to begin to sprout. The pea shoot was removed from Ron's lung by a thoracic surgeon. As a joke, the hospital staff served Ron peas as part of his first meal after the operation. Ron took the joke in stride and ate them. Ron's not the only person to have a plant grow in their lungs. In 2009, Russian doctors operated on 28-year-old Artyom Sidyorkin, expecting to remove a tumor, and allegedly found a 2-inch fir seedling sprouting in his lung. Obviously, the results of ingesting non-food items can be very dangerous. 52-year-old Margaret Dahlman of the Netherlands showed up at the hospital complaining of a stomachache. Upon viewing x-rays of her stomach, doctors were dumbfounded to see a large mass of silverware. When going in for surgery, Margaret explained to the doctors that often when she sat down to eat, she couldn't help herself. She would ignore the meal and feast on the cutlery instead. Margaret had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which left her with an urge to eat non-food items. The surgery removed 78 spoons and forks from Margaret's stomach. However, no knives were found. Margaret was never interested in eating those, and she couldn't explain why. Margaret made a full recovery and underwent therapy for her predilection. Margaret's not the only one to suffer this strange affliction, though. Doctors have removed a variety of items that patients have ingested. Common non-food snacks are magnets, coin, and chalk. In 2014, a teenage girl from Kyrgyzstan's bad habit almost ended her life. Though her stomach was swollen, 18-year-old Aperi Alexieva kept losing weight and was dangerously dehydrated and malnourished. She couldn't keep any food down, even just drinking water brought about terrible pains. Doctors struggled to diagnose her at first and then figured out the culprit. A massive hairball was blocking her digestive system. Aperi had to be transported to a large hospital in the capital city of Bishkek for an emergency life-saving surgery to remove the 9-pound hairball. The hairball formed due to Aperi's proclivity to chew on and eat her hair and bits and pieces of wool she found on the carpet at home. Apparently, during her surgery, her stomach was so distended, hair began to ooze out as soon as the wall of Aperi's stomach was cut. Despite looking through 50 years of records, the doctor said they were unable to find any cases that involved a hairball this large. You heard correctly, not other cases involving a hairball, other cases involving a hairball this large. Sometimes after a vacation, you end up feeling more stressed than if you had just stayed at work. In the summer of 2007, Aaron Dallas of Carbondale, Colorado, visited the town of Orange Walk, Belize to assist with a mountain bike race. Upon returning home, he developed large, painful bumps on his head that bled and oozed. His doctor thought they were fly bites that would eventually heal up, but the bumps wouldn't heal. Aaron visited a specialist who thought he might have shingles, a painful rash caused by the varicella zoster virus, the same virus that causes chickenpox. Aaron tried several different creams and ointments, but to no avail. Weeks went by. Aaron started getting flashes of pain that would send him to his knees. It felt like spikes were being driven into his skull. Then the lumps started throbbing and moving. Aaron thought he was going crazy. He could even hear the lumps. Another visit to a doctor brought about the revelation that Aaron's scalp was infested with botfly larvae. Medical staff numbed Aaron's head and extracted 5 fingernail-sized maggots. Most likely, Aaron was bitten by a mosquito carrying botfly eggs. Mosquitoes, stable flies, and other insects are used by female botflies to disseminate their eggs to various hosts. In this case, the host was Aaron. Aaron's not the only person who's brought home an unexpected souvenir after a vacation. During the summer of 2013, the Franklin family of Aliso Viejo, California went on a camping trip to Spooner's Cove Beach on the central Californian coast. 4-year-old Paul fell and scraped his right knee on a rock. His parents cleaned up the small cut and put a band-aid on it. However, the wound kept seeping and never seemed to scab over. A week later, Paul fell on the knee again while ice skating, further opening the wound. His mother once again cleaned and redressed the cut. Over the next few weeks, Paul's knee became swollen and infected. He began to limp. Thinking he had a staph infection, his parents took him to the doctor. At first, a 10-day course of antibiotics seemed to improve the infection, but then it flared up again. The cut began seeping pus, and a small black lump grew under Paul's skin. His mother worried that the wound was becoming necrotic. Against doctor's advice, she squeezed the lump, and an odd-looking tiny rock popped out of Paul's knee. His mother took a closer look at the pebble, noticing a swirl pattern. She realized it was a tiny snail, and it was alive. The Franklins figured that there were snail eggs on the rock Paul scraped his knee on. Paul's parents let him keep the snail as a pet and he named it Turbo after the cartoon snail. We could go on and on about the various insects, larvae, tapeworms, and spiders that have been discovered and removed from people. Ears and nose seem to be especially popular hiding places, perhaps because of the easy access. However, we'll spare you and leave it to your imagination. In 2015, Estela Melendez, a 91-year-old resident of La Boca, Chile, went to the hospital after a fall. She had an X-ray and was told by doctors she had a tumor in her abdomen and needed surgery. A second X-ray was ordered for confirmation and it revealed something shocking. The mass was not a tumor, but a fetus. For the last 60 years, Estela had a lump in her abdomen but didn't know that she was carrying a lithopedion, or stone baby. It's a rare phenomenon that occurs when a fetus dies during pregnancy and is too large to be reabsorbed by the mother. As part of a foreign body reaction, the fetus calcifies on the outside, protecting the mother's body from dead tissue and preventing infection. There have been about 300 cases of known lithopedion worldwide, with the calcified fetus being carried for an average of 22 years. In several cases, the mother was able to become pregnant again and gave birth to children without incident. In the case of Estela, the mass was only sometimes uncomfortable, but not causing serious pain. Medical professionals decided not to proceed with surgery. However, sometimes doctors do remove a lithopedion. In 2009, 92-year-old Huang Yijun from China had a 60-year-old fetus removed. In 1948, when she was 31, she became pregnant only to find that she had a rare condition. Instead of implanting in the uterus as normal, her pregnancy was ectopic, with the egg implanting outside her fallopian tubes, causing what's known as an abdominal pregnancy. The fetus soon passed away, and doctors told Huang Yijun to get it removed to avoid any potential future health problems. Unfortunately, the surgery was expensive, and Huang simply didn't have the money. So she ignored her condition until she was able to have it removed some 60 years later. Our last story of something disturbing removed from a person's body is about an interesting and creepy medical phenomenon which is estimated to occur in 1 in 500,000 live births. All his life, Sanju Bhagat of Nagpur, India, had breathing problems and a protruding belly. Over time, his stomach swelled even further, making him look like he was 9 months pregnant. One night in June of 1999, his breathing problems got worse, and an ambulance rushed the 36-year-old farmer to the hospital. Doctors began to operate, thinking that Sanju had a large tumor pressing on his diaphragm. As they cut into Sanju's stomach, unexpectedly gallons of liquid gushed out. Then the doctors found something unsettling. Sanju had a twin. In his stomach, there was a half-formed fetus with hair, bones, and developed hands with long fingernails. Sanju had one of the world's rarest and most bizarre medical conditions, fetus in fetu. It's an extremely rare development abnormality that occurs early in pregnancy when a fetus gets trapped inside its twin. The parasitic twin leeches off the dominant twin as the fetuses continue to grow. Usually, both fetuses die before birth from the strain of sharing a placenta. However, in some cases such as Sanju's, the host twin survives and is born. It is possible for the trapped fetus to survive past birth by forming an umbilical cord-like structure that leaches its twin's blood supply. Fewer than 90 cases of fetus in fetu have been recorded in medical literature, though. Sanju's case is even more unusual because no one suspected Bhagat had a twin inside him for 36 years. After surgery, Sanju's ability to breathe improved and he made a full recovery. As a kid, Sanju had been bullied and teased that he was pregnant. Ironically, his tormentors were sort of right. It's a phenomenon that's incredibly rare, occurring in only 1 of 100,000 live births. Yet, when it does happen, it often comes with a poor prognosis. As many as 60% of conjoined twins do not usually make it past the first few days of life. It's a subject that often comes with many questions. How are conjoined twins created? What can be done for conjoined twins who continue to survive after birth? And how do doctors go about separating them? Also, what's the quality of life like for those who do not undergo the surgery? In a normal process of identical or monozygotic twin creation, the fertilized egg, otherwise known as a zygote, splits into 2 inside the mother. This happens very early on, often before the woman realizes that she's pregnant. In the case of conjoined twins, however, the splitting of the zygote pauses before the process is complete. Development then continues as normal, forming 2 fused embryos that will eventually result in connected infants. So, can it also occur in fraternal or dizygotic twins? As you may already know, creation of fraternal twins occurs when 2 separate eggs are fertilized by 2 different sperm. As with identical twins, fraternal twins do not share 100% of the same genes. Instead, fraternal twins are more like regular siblings, sharing 50% of their genes, and they may or may not resemble one another. While identical twins are almost always born the same sex, fraternal twins can vary. Boy-girl twins are the most common type of dizygotic twins, occurring in 50% of cases. Girl-girl twins are the second most common, and boy-boy twins are the least common. Only in very rare instances of chromosomal conditions can monozygotic twins consist of different sexes. While non-identical twins can't become conjoined, they can become something called chimeras. This occurs when fraternal twins fuse together early in development. The word chimeras originally derived from Greek mythology as a beast with a lion's head, a goat's body, and a serpent's tail. Real chimeras, however, are not quite this dramatic. The scientific definition relates to a genetic phenomenon within organisms that occur when an individual develops from two or more zygotes with distinct genotypes. Thus, this does not result in two separate connected people like with conjoined twins, but rather a single person consisting of genes from a mix of both twins. This would be like combining two of your siblings into one person. In essence, you could be your own twin brother or sister. If that isn't confusing enough, consider the interesting fact that although uncommon, it is technically possible for fraternal twins to have different fathers. This happens when two eggs are fertilized, each from the sperm of a different man. Theoretically, it is possible that these twins could then fuse together, creating a person with chimerism who has two biological fathers. It's easy to imagine that this could lead to some very confusing family dynamics. In the case of chimerism, though, it is incredibly rare, with only 30 to 100 cases known to this day. Returning to the topic of conjoined twins, you might wonder what happens with those who survive and how do doctors separate them. Separating conjoined twins is a highly risky procedure, and many doctors will not do it unless it's absolutely necessary for the quality of life of the impacted individuals. It is typically based on a case-by-case basis and really depends on what part of the body the twins are connected and whether they can survive separation. Obviously, if they share too many vital organs, separation is more difficult. If twins share a heart, for instance, successful surgery becomes impossible. If, however, they only share a liver and a GI tract, surgery is a more realistic option. Obviously, if the twins have a separate set of organs, chances for successful surgery and survival are greater. The rarest type of conjoined twins has to do with being connected at the head. The name for this is craniopagus twins. Separation for this type depends on whether the twins share a brain or if they're connected at the skull that acts as a barrier between two distinct brains. In this case, it's possible to cut through the skull to separate them. Modern medicine makes separation for conjoined twins much easier and more benefit from successful surgery. This is incredible when considering that past generations had no hope for it. Historically, connected twins who survived infancy had to remain conjoined throughout their entire lives. An example of this comes from a famous set of twins known as Ang and Chang Bunker, who were connected at the stomach. They were brothers born in Thailand in 1811. During this time, Thailand was called Siam, thus coined the term Siamese twins. The name is no longer valid today though, since it has a negative stigma associated with it. The fact that Ang and Chang were boys is especially rare. For reasons doctors do not yet fully understand, female conjoined twins are more likely to survive than males. As many as 70 to 75% that live tend to be female. Thus, the brothers were truly exceptional. The boys lived out their lives pretty normally for the most part, and even wound up marrying two different women. They often had to take turns staying in the home of each wife because the two women didn't want to sleep in the same bed with one another. The men also ended up having many children. Chang had 10 kids and Ang had 11. Toward the end of their lives, however, Chang became an alcoholic and Ang wanted to be separated from him because he didn't want to have to carry around Chang's lifeless body upon death. In the end, Ang only lived a few hours after Chang's death. The cause of his passing is unclear, though some believed he died out of shock from seeing his dead brother. Because Ang and Chang were only connected by the liver, doctors believe they could have easily been separated had they been alive today. At the time, however, such surgery would have been fatal, resulting in excessive blood loss, which would have likely killed them both. So why separate conjoined twins? Well, for one, conjoined twins that live after birth are more susceptible to greater health problems and complications. Their positioning may also leave them to be more uncomfortable, having to bend their backs and contort their bodies in unnatural ways to accommodate their connection. Successful separation also allows twins to live fully independent, autonomous lifestyles apart from one another and to be able to freely make decisions for themselves without having to consult the sibling they're connected to. In some cases, however, not separating them might be the better option for an improved quality of life. One such case involves that of Abby and Brittany Hensel, twins with two different heads who share a single body. In a 2011 documentary about these girls, doctors explained that their quality of life would be worse if they were to be separated because each girl would only have one arm and one leg and barely be able to function normally without the other. The documentary depicted Abby and Brittany's life as being as close to normal as possible. They attended high school in a small town where everyone knew them and weren't so shocked by their appearance. In school, the girls managed to have many friends and be treated like two distinct individuals despite being connected at their body. Their teachers were interviewed saying that one was very outgoing while the other was more reserved. The girls even received two different driver's licenses and are perfectly capable of driving a car like a normal person. In their case, each twin controls her side of the body, and together, their movements coordinate with one another. Talk about teamwork. Though they claim not to be able to feel the other's side of the body. However, they will appear to be synchronized with one another, that one will unconsciously scratch a mosquito bite on the arm of the other. Doctors are puzzled by this and believe that there must be a strong psychological bond that connects the two for these kinds of harmonized movements. They admit, though, that sleeping is often made difficult, since positioning can be a challenge. When asked if they would like to be separated, Abby and Brittany said no. They explained when interviewed that they did not know any other way of being and they greatly enjoy each other's company. Today, the girls work as 5th grade teachers, though they're given one salary and treated as one employee. This annoys them greatly because they have two different degrees and two different perspectives on how to teach. Life for them can often be frustrating with the constant confusion of outsiders on whether to treat the twins separately or as one. Still, the two are inspirational for others since they do not let people bring them down or prevent them from living a fulfilling life. In this way, the girls can be viewed as figures of unity and strength. If you're planning to start a family someday, perhaps you're wondering what the odds are of having conjoined twins or even twins in general. Well, as mentioned at the beginning, your chances of having conjoined twins are roughly around 1 in 100,000, which makes it highly unlikely. With those numbers, half of those conjoined twins tend to be stillborn. This means that your chances of having surviving conjoined twins are about 1 in 200,000. Highly unlikely. Though if you do manage to beat the odds, perhaps you should consider buying a ticket and trying your chances with playing the lottery. Now, maybe you're curious about the odds of having twins in general, not conjoined. Ultrasound technicians can usually tell very early on whether you're carrying twins. Whether the twins are monozygotic or dizygotic, however, can be very difficult to determine. Usually, fraternal twins can be identified if the babies are different sexes or have different blood types. Your odds of having twins in general are influenced by a wide variety of different factors. Many of these include whether you're a woman over the age of 30, using fertility treatments, overweight, taller than average, or have a family history of twins. Overall, the rate for identical twins is pretty much constant across all regions, while fraternal twin production has been suggested to be highly affected by ethnicity and location. The reason behind this is mostly indeterminate, but overall, those of African ethnicity are most likely to produce fraternal twins, while Asians are least likely. By location, there can be much differentiation in this. In 2003, statistics in the United States showed that twin rates for Black Americans were higher at around 17 per 1,000 pregnancies. For Caucasian Americans, this number was roughly 15. This may not seem like a major difference at first, but when compared to other countries, the gap widens. In the same year, the twinning rates in Denmark, Greece, and the Netherlands were around 20 per 1,000 births, while Nigeria still had them beat with a whopping twinning rate of 40 per 1,000. That's double the amount. Still, even within Nigeria, there were variations of twins found between different regions. Western and Eastern Nigeria carried the highest rates, with 33 to 67 twins per 1,000 births, while this number was lower in Northern Nigeria with only 19. Again, the reasoning behind this is unclear. This is a true story. A man just in his 40s went to see his doctor. The man knew he had cancer, but with unforeseen issues popping up, the doctor asked him to see an oncologist again. A series of tests were performed and a bunch of specialists were brought in. The original doctor went back to see the guy in the hospital, shook his hand, and said, "I'll see you in a few days." Once the results came back, the doctor was aware that this man would not live long. He would be gone forever, and his family would grieve. But this is what the doctor said about this reality, telling him what this all meant. How he was almost certain he would die sooner than he thought proved too difficult. This can never be easy, never mind how many years you've put in as a doctor. But it's also the reality for a lot of people that work in the medical profession. In the case we just mentioned, the man was very close to death just 1 month after he experienced those new issues. It can be especially hard telling someone who isn't very old that their time is almost up. The end of life is rarely simple, and sometimes the professionals can't say how long someone's got. Sometimes they get it wrong and the person makes a recovery. But more often than not, when someone is told they're going to die, the end will come soon enough. Sometimes the patient can be very confused, perhaps not fully understanding what's really happening. Sometimes legal documents have to be signed, and anyone who's had to go through that with a dying person will know it can be difficult and heartbreaking. This person might have been offered treatments, but at times they'll be told there's nothing we can do. Right now, we just want to make your last days or months as comfortable as possible. This is what's called palliative care. This kind of care is just a way to treat end-stage patients who might have various diseases. It can give them a good quality of life during the end in accordance with their circumstances. It should help this end be peaceful. This can also be very difficult times for loved ones. Watching their brother, sister, wife, husband, best friend have their last threads of mortality snipped by the day. At times, the patient may not be able to communicate, either because of medications or the disease itself. With some cancer patients, there can be good days, good hours, when the patient suddenly looks better and does start chatting again. But then loved ones may become saddened again when the next day the person's in bad shape. So now on to the question, what do doctors wish patients knew about these end days? One thing is, according to this one doctor, a person might look as though they're dying, but actually their days are perhaps not numbered. The person could die, but could pull through. Understandably, the family of this person might not want to send their loved one to palliative care, because that might seem like sending them on their way to the abyss. It might seem like giving up, and so the family won't want this. But the doctor said you don't have to be on the verge of death with a countdown to enter into this kind of care. He said don't be afraid to ask for it if the person is sick and suffering. Palliative care doesn't have to be a death sentence and might just be the best option for a sick person. But then in some cases, the person really is at the edge, and palliative care in a hospice is absolutely needed. The thing is, sometimes doctors wait too long to tell the family this is what should happen now. Nothing else can be done, as we said, are not easy words to say for many doctors. In fact, research undertaken by the U.S. National Institutes of Health asked this question: why do physicians overestimate life expectancy of a person who is terminally ill? This research showed that some doctors wait too long, especially if they're close to the patient. Sometimes waiting until the 11th hour to send a patient to hospice is just not recognizing the seriousness of the disease. In most cases, in this study, the disease was cancer. When that study was published, patients who had less than 6 months to live, or at least were thought to have around that time left, could be sent to palliative care. But the research showed that most of the patients were in a hospice for less than 6 weeks. Part of the study read, providing a physically comfortable death is a worthy goal. It reduces regrets among survivors, yet more time provides the opportunity for the dying person to participate directly in the process of validating the past and planning for the future, and gives the family the chance to relish or repair bonds with the dying person. So what doctors want patients and their family to know is that even if the physician doesn't talk about palliative care, they can come forward and recommend it. They don't have to wait for the doctor. Do doctors get it wrong sometimes? Of course they do. Timing death is no easy task, and while miraculous recoveries are very rare, getting the survival time exactly right can be difficult. Another study by the National Institutes of Health looked at 343 doctors who had given survival estimates to 468 terminally ill patients. In that study, the median survival for the patients was 24 days, but the doctors who were in the research were more optimistic than pessimistic when telling the patient how long he or she had left. NIH writes only 20%, 92 out of 468, of predictions were accurate. 63%, or 295 out of 468, were overly optimistic, and 17%, 81 out of 468, were overly pessimistic. Perhaps some doctors just want to give more hope to the patient, but the problem said that being over-optimistic can negatively affect the quality of care given to patients near the end of their life. More research was done in this matter, and the researchers came up with a question that can be asked by a family to the doctor. The question is, "Doctor, would you be surprised if your patient died within a year?" If the doctor replies no, then perhaps the family might start thinking about a hospice already. Remember that 24 days is the average stay, but a sick person could stay for months in a hospice. If you are the dying person, you might also ask, "Doctor, would you be surprised if I died in the next year?" It's not an easy thing to ask, but it might, in the end, make the last stint down here on planet Earth a bit more comfortable. As one doctor points out, the healthcare system is designed to keep you alive as long as possible, but there are cases of people who've just had enough painful treatments. They actually want to slowly fade away in as much comfort as possible. He said it's okay to ask for palliative care in such a case. That same physician actually wrote a book called A Beginner's Guide to the End: Practical Advice for Living Life and Facing Death. There's a part of that book that talks about humor. If you've ever been sat around the bed of a dying person, you'll know it's not always the best situation to start telling jokes and being funny. But he says always being miserable and teary-eyed all the time can be like an early death for the person. Go ahead, tell a joke, be normal, jest, have fun. Don't make it any more painful than it needs to be. The doctor wrote, "Illness isolates people, not just physically. When we get sick, people around us start censoring themselves. The solemnity is supposed to be a form of kindness, perhaps, but it can feel more like yet another loss, almost a premature death." He also points out that illness has its fair share of indignities, but sometimes laughing in the face of such indignities can be helpful. Don't cast gloom over the bedridden person, be a bright presence. Perhaps when it comes to man and wife, the joking can be put aside for something else. Another doctor who writes about sexuality at the end of life said intimacy doesn't need to stop. She mentioned a case in which the patient actually died in an act of intimacy. This might sound awkward or even unethical to some people, but would you rather be able to be intimate until the end or not? She tells people that if it is possible, then go for it. It happens and it's just a form of showing love. In that one case, love right up until the end. You see, don't ever forget that a person is living until they're dead. It might sound obvious, but some people can treat a dying person as if they have no life force left. That could be making their final days all the more difficult. Don't be afraid to show some love. It can make them feel connected during this hard time, and while life might be falling apart, they still have someone hanging on to them. As we said before, during the final stages, it can be difficult because the patient might be in and out of consciousness. Even when they're conscious, they might be delirious. We read about one particular patient with cancer who would talk to people from his youth. He would seem to hallucinate, even smoking invisible cigarettes that he thought were real. He would shout at nurses and call them names, all the while demanding an ashtray for this invisible smoke. This can be really upsetting for some people, and sometimes very, very challenging. At times, a patient might do things that are hard to deal with. Their personality might change a lot, which could make you laugh or could drive you up the wall. Some patients have been known to say quite vulgar things to friends, families, and even nurses. But what you must understand as the person seeing that is that deathbed delirium is not that uncommon and shouldn't be taken seriously. This person really is not in their right mind. Don't take things too personally if something bad is said to you. The nurses will forgive the person, we promise. It's also said that during those final stages, the family or caregivers are often afraid to leave the room, thinking the end is nigh. It might be nigh, but it might also be days or weeks away. Sometimes you have to leave the room, you have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to do some work. Don't be hard on yourself. You cannot be there every minute of every day. To be your best around this person, you'll also need some rest. Hospice workers have said many times people just don't get that rest and wait over the person for their dying breath. It's very common, but they also said sometimes a person just dies alone and that cannot be helped. If you're there during the final days, please don't feel bad that you weren't there for the last breath. It can be like waiting for a rainbow to appear outside. Be loving, be funny, be yourself, and if you are there not at the end, just accept it. In the end, that person you love who is dying loves you too, and the only thing they want from you is to go on having a great life after they die. They don't want you to feel full of regret or be weighed down with misery. If you do have to go out someplace and things aren't looking good, give the person a kiss on the head and know that it might be the last time you do that. You did your best, and perhaps your love was felt even if the person didn't seem to be awake. When you're a Russian physician at an Antarctic research station and develop appendicitis, the options you have are quite limited. Basically, you can either attempt to operate on yourself and possibly survive, or do nothing, and before long you'll be dead. Dr. Leonid Rogozov chose the first option and got rid of the organ with the assistance of a meteorologist and a mechanic. The crazy thing is, he was not the first doctor to operate on himself to remove his own appendix. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane holds that distinction and actually cut himself apart not just once but 3 different times. Let's find out why in this episode of the Infographics Show, the story of the doctor who removed his own appendix. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane came from a family that, to say was quite well known, would be an understatement. In fact, his father, Thomas L. Kane, a lawyer with high-up government connections, was also a Civil War Major General, and his own father had been a Brigadier General for the Union before him. Thomas Kane married Evan's mother, Elizabeth Wood, a doctor with a father who was president of the New York Board of Education. Together, the couple had 4 children. Evan was born 6 days before the Civil War began, and like his mother, grew up to be a medical professional. So did his brother Thomas, and even his sister Harriet Amelia, quite unoriginally got a medical degree of her own. His older brother Elisha, though he went a different path, had bragging rights just the same as an engineering graduate from Princeton University. In other words, Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane came from a prestigious and accomplished family, and he was doing his part to continue its impressive reputation. His hands-on experiences in the field of medicine began when he was a young boy of 17. At this time, he went with his father, his older brother Elisha, and an ex-Civil War colonel named Dr. Freeman to Mexico on behalf of a railroad. One thing led to another once they were there, and found themselves caught in the middle of a violent uprising. They were given permission to treat the wounded, and the 3 men worked together under the guidance of Dr. Freeman. His main directives were amputations of various limbs, and while others did most of the procedure, Evan Kane assisted. Another decade would pass before he graduated from a Jefferson Medical College and was able to operate on his own or make any life or death decisions. Evan became a chief surgeon at a hospital he helped found and was rather unsurprisingly given the Kane name. His main areas of practice was what was known as railway surgery, and he performed procedures similar to those he had helped while he had still been a teen. In other words, he specialized in the trauma and routine care of railway employees, their families, and others with railroad-affiliated injuries. Such work came with high job security. Due to the hazards of the job of working on a railway, doctors were unfortunately needed quite often. In 1897, 1,693 workers were killed, and an additional 27,667 were hurt or in some way wounded. With the further expansion of transcontinental routes, it meant that many people were risking their lives on a regular basis while nowhere near a hospital. Dr. Evan Kane was one of the professionals who helped meet this need for convenient medical care. For this purpose, he worked with as many as 5 different railroads. He not only practiced medicine, but focused his many talents on creating and improving upon medical products and procedures. An example of this were asbestos bandages, unusually strong as well as heat and flame resistant, although we're now aware that asbestos is unfortunately a carcinogen. Mica windows or sheets of a fireproof mineral were also another idea of his to assist with surgery on the brain. These sheets would protect skin grafts from damage. He also helped develop the procedure of multiple site hypodermoclysis as an alternative method to an IV of introducing fluids to the body. His ideas did not stop there. In quite an unusual move for the time, Dr. Evan Kane was also known to play music during his surgeries and was convinced that doing so had many benefits. The use of the phonograph, he claimed, would help calm patients as well as put them at ease and give them something else to focus on. But while Evan Kane was credited with all these things, his removal of his own appendix is considered his most famous endeavor and his crowning life achievement. Believe it or not, the appendectomy wasn't the first time he had cut himself apart or engaged in what is termed as self-surgery. 2 years earlier, he had sliced off the pointer finger of his left hand after it developed an infected ulcer. He used only a topical anesthetic for the procedure, which effectively relieved him of any pain. This likely gave him the confidence necessary to use these types of drugs during bigger and more complex operations, and he had several compelling reasons to attempt this. In 1921, most patients undergoing a major operation were given ether as a form of anesthesia that knocked them fully unconscious. Upon its initial use, it revolutionized the medical field as patients were able to be cut into and apart without feeling unbearable pain. However, while it certainly reduced their suffering, that was not all it was known to do. Its side effects included delirium, numbness, loss of muscle control, and a greater risk of dying before or after the operation was complete. Those who had underlying medical conditions of a serious nature, such as a heart condition, were not considered ideal candidates for major operations using ether for this reason. With their compromised health, exposure to the drug was considered much too risky. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane believed there was a way around this, as surgery on his finger using alternative forms of anesthesia in which he had no serious side effects seemed to suggest there were superior options available. However, he faced the challenge of getting those that mattered to agree. In order to gain support for alternative drugs, he would have to prove their use during a much larger type of surgery. Unfortunately, there were not many volunteers who were willing to be cut open to test the effectiveness of the only form of painkiller they would be given during the procedure. 60-year-old Evan Kane could not care less. A practical man, he solved this problem by himself. Propped up a few pillows, and while a nurse supported his head, he lay upon the surgical table and took out his own appendix. After all, he hardly needed to see what he was doing, as he had completed the procedure several thousand times on others. Under local anesthesia, and while 3 other surgeons looked on, he made a large incision in his abdomen by using a scalpel. As he progressed into the deeper layers of tissue, he methodically closed off blood vessels one by one. Once his appendix was out, others present, including his brother Tom L. Kane, stitched him back up again. Evan Kane not only survived the experience, but made a complete recovery. And before you think he was absolutely crazy to have done such a thing, it's worth mentioning that the procedure may have eventually had to happen anyway. Evan suffered from chronic appendicitis and likely suffered uncomfortable symptoms, as well as ran the risk of having his condition become more serious. It was just another added benefit that in the same go, he had proven the effectiveness of alternate forms of pain-relieving drugs. These were then used much more frequently, leading to safer operations and many more people qualifying for more comfortable and life-saving surgery. Acute appendicitis, for example, can lead to death by sepsis if not treated properly. Beyond this, he saw additional payoffs as well. He had found it very worthwhile to experience the entire procedure, not only from the perspective of the surgeon, but from the patient's point of view. In this way, it could be easier for him to give his patients what they needed, so they had the best operating and post-op experience. We assume there are not many doctors out there willing to go to such lengths to do this. Even after the successful removal of his appendix, Evan Kane was not quite done cutting himself open. Just a decade later, at the age of 70, he again operated on himself to fix an inguinal hernia, which is a technical way of describing an area where fat or tissue pokes on through the abdominal wall. This procedure was a bit riskier than the others, but he was able to finish it successfully and avoided cutting into a nearby femoral artery. To put the risk into perspective, experts estimate that significant damage to the artery in certain locations can cause death by blood loss in as little as 5 minutes. But once again, Dr. Evan Kane was less than concerned. In fact, those who were present claimed the doctor joked around and smiled the entire time he was repairing himself. And less than 2 days later, he was again in the operating room, carrying out various surgical procedures on others. This was a time when Dr. Kane had already been in the papers. His 3rd hernia repair operation was quite the event, but even between his 2nd and 3rd self-surgeries, Evan was splashed across headlines and the topic of conversation. In this instance, it was as he provided testimony in the case of the death of his daughter-in-law, who prosecutors alleged had been drowned by his 37-year-old son. His son and his son's wife, Jenny Graham Kane, had apparently been swimming in a beach near Hampton, Virginia, when Jenny drowned. While his son claimed she had fallen from a rock and he had tried to save her, some fishermen said they saw the couple swimming before they heard Jenny scream. Dr. Evan Kane came to his son's rescue by providing scientific testimony and a doctor's, although hardly an impartial one's, expert opinion. He described Jenny's health as unstable and that she had a condition known as angina pectoris, or a disease of the heart, which may have caused a heart attack and her subsequent drowning. It was his word against little more than suspicion, as there'd been no official autopsy of the body. As a result, Kane's son, while guilty or not, was allowed to walk free. Evan Kane had done many things during his life that had earned him great fame, though in time it seemed that his many surgeries caught up with him. Following the repair of his hernia, his health never fully went back to what it once was before the operation. He died only a few months later and 5 days before he turned 71, but his memory lives on in improved medical care for many, and even in at least one television series. The Nick was a show meant to take place in a New York City hospital that had a true-to-life 2nd season finale. The surgeon in the series, a Dr. John Thackeray, is shown removing dead tissue from his intestines. Unfortunately, unlike the real-life Kane who avoided a similar situation, he severed the nearby arteries and died. This was no mere coincidence, as the executive producer of the series mentioned Kane when describing the Thackeray character. Beyond TV, we continue to benefit from his past wisdom in real life in one more more critical way. The next time you undergo an operation and those in charge are thoughtful enough to play some music, or alternatively you provide your own soundtrack, you can thank Dr. Evan Kane for promoting this idea. May we suggest a soundtrack that includes Smooth Operator by Sade, Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd, or The Bee Gees' Staying Alive. Though, let's warn against songs like Queen's Another One Bites the Dust or REM's Everybody Hurts instead. These would be a tad less calming under the circumstances. Cockroaches are insidious little creatures. They plague our homes and resist our best attempts to exterminate them. Yet no matter how bad the infestation, no one ever seriously thinks that they would be bold enough to make a move inside the human body. But that's exactly what happened in the city of Injambakam, India, just this November. One night, a 42-year-old woman identified only as Selvi felt an insect crawling around in her nostril as she slept. Brushing the insect away, she was horrified to discover that it had bolted straight up her nose. Feeling it crawling around in her nostril, Selvi said that the small cockroach gave her a burning sensation in her eyes as it crawled around. Unable to sleep, and who could blame her, she sat up and waited for dawn so she could go to a nearby clinic. At the clinic, the doctors quickly referred her to a nearby government hospital, where she had a nasal endoscopy performed to find the intrusive cockroach. Still alive, the nose-spelunking insect had lodged itself in the skull between Selvi's eyes. "This is the first such case I have seen in my 3 decades of practice," remarked Dr. M.R. Shankar. The doctors would go on to successfully remove the cockroach and comment that they were glad Selvi had not waited to see them, as if the cockroach had died, she would have developed an infection, which could have spread to the brain. Those doctors probably shouldn't have worried about Selvi taking her time to see them, as we're pretty sure nobody would hesitate to immediately head to the hospital if a cockroach ran up their nose. Selvi's incident was a freak accident, as cockroaches don't typically decide to go exploring inside the human body. Other insects, however, aren't so careful or deliberately seek out other creatures to inhabit or lay eggs in. If you've got the stomach for it, stay tuned as we explore more incidents of creepy crawlies ending up inside people. In July of 2013, 4-year-old Paul Franklin was on vacation with his family when he tripped and skinned his knee at the beach. Kids are notorious for getting bumps and scrapes, so his family cleaned him up, bandaged him, and didn't think much of it. A few weeks later, the knee became infected and the family took Paul to the hospital. After a quick inspection, doctors believed the cause to be nothing more than a staph infection and treated it with antibiotics. The infection did indeed abate, but a black bump just under the skin continued to grow. On a hunch, Paul's mom decided to squeeze the bump, and out popped a living sea snail. Turns out that when Paul had scratched up his knee, he must have inadvertently picked up a fertilized sea snail egg, which got stuck in his flesh. Paul took the tiny invader in stride though, and decided to keep it, calling it Turbo after the star of an animated film. Earlier, we mocked the old wives' tale of a spider climbing into your mouth, only to be swallowed. Yet our next incident makes us feel that perhaps we were a bit hasty in our disbelief. Back in 2014, an Australian man named Dylan Maxwell went on holiday to the Indonesian island of Bali. Enjoying the tropical beaches and lush jungles, Dylan felt what he thought was an insect bite at the base of his small appendix scar on his navel. Visiting a local doctor, he was prescribed an antihistamine for insect bite and discharged. Upon returning home, however, a red scar-like trail started developing from his navel all the way up his chest, and an alarmed Dylan visited a hospital to be checked out. Doctors were shocked to discover that a small tropical spider had actually crawled inside of Dylan and made his way up his body, staying alive for 3 whole days. Dylan's spider tenant was successfully removed, and the worst Dylan has to endure now is his friends calling him Spider-Man. Botflies are horrible little creatures who lay their eggs on the exterior of other living creatures, usually mosquitoes or flies. Upon hatching, the larvae burrow into the host and start to feed, emerging later to pupate into mature adult botflies. Sometimes a female botfly will choose a human as a host, and usually the burrowed larva is easily removed by simply covering the burrow hole with an ointment or other substance that blocks the larva from breathing. Usually, the U.S. Air Force and other military branches routinely engage in humanitarian aid work, dispatching military doctors and other medical personnel to impoverished areas around the world. Back in the year 2000, a 5-year-old boy reported to an Air Force medical camp with a swollen eye and complaining of not being able to see out of it. When the military doctors examined his eye, they were horrified to discover a nearly fully grown botfly larva attached directly to his eyeball. Under general anesthesia, the doctors made a small incision to the eyeball and removed a whopping 19mm botfly larva. The boy would go on to make a full recovery, and after learning of this incident, flies may have trumped cockroaches as our personal most hated insect in the world. Our original story features a woman with a cockroach who could have infected her brain, but our next one shows you what happens when insects manage to actually get inside the brain itself. If you have the stomach for it, keep on watching, and if not, we recommend you switch to another video ASAP. Okay, we warned you. Back in October of 2002, a 70-year-old man in the US was involved in a minor car accident. When police arrived, they were shocked at the man's condition. Despite not having suffered any injuries in the accident, the upper portion of the man's skull and large amounts of his brain were visible, and the shocked officers immediately contacted paramedics. When taken to a hospital, the man was found to be suffering from an unusual form of cancer, which had eaten away at the portion of his skull and scalp. But because it did not cause him any pain, he never sought treatment. The exposed brain was discovered to be infested with live maggots, which had infested the man for an unknown amount of time. Doctors removed the maggots by suction and with a mild bleach solution, though the man would go on to die from his untreated cancer 3 months later. You might be wondering how the man could possibly be alive after having an exposed brain infested with live maggots, but turns out that the maggots were probably what was keeping him alive. As the cancer ate away at the man's skull and scalp, the maggots, which only eat decaying flesh and leave healthy flesh alone, would have consumed any infected flesh that might have caused a serious and deadly infection. We have no idea how this man chose to go around his day with an exposed brain and live maggots living on it, but at least the maggots he was giving a home to were keeping his gaping wound clean and healthy. In fact, doctors in developed nations have started using maggots to treat infected wounds, and the treatments have been found to be far more effective than anything used prior. So next time you go to the doctor with a bad cut, if it gets infected, you might just go home patched up with a few maggots wiggling around inside of you and keeping you healthy. By the way, if you have the stomach for it, go ahead and Google this last story, as there are photos. Be warned, you might not want to eat lunch today if you do. We sincerely hope you can sleep tonight without feeling an itching, crawling sensation all over your body. Is it just scratchy sheets, or is it some insect making its way along your skin, just looking for a chance to make you its new home? Is that random itch by your ear just a stray hair, or is it a creepy crawly trying to get inside your ear and to your brain? Is that bump on your stomach just another bug bite, or is it something burrowing deeper inside you, looking to lay its eggs in your flesh? These are all thoughts that we really sincerely hope you avoid after watching our video, especially tonight when you're laying in your bed in the dark, or maybe next time you go camping. It's the mid-1800s and a group of doctors surround a table which has splayed on it an opened cadaver. An audience of men of science watch in awe as those doctors remove organs from the body and try to explain the cause of death. This is a new age, a new era, but while some of these men are legends in their own right, they're still pretty ignorant. Here's why. After the discectomy, a man rushes in and tells those doctors that they should wash their hands before returning to their hospitals. It could save lives, he says. "This is preposterous," barks one doctor. "Why in God's name would one wash their hands? Get out of here, you deluded imbecile." Welcome to the sad, wonderful, and wacky world of how hand washing got started. You see, at the time, those doctors were in fact about to change the world. They were champions in an era which could be called the medical enlightenment. This was the time that surgeons were understanding the human body much better than ever before, when illness and disease was no longer being blamed on a person having a demonic sensibility. Opening up bodies was nothing new. In fact, in the 17th century, the company of surgeons in London would often dissect convicted murderers in public. After all, they'd been hanged, of course. London wasn't quite Westeros, although body snatching was all the rage, because those doctors and surgeons needed more training. These surgeons were like kings around the time of the 1850s. Dissection was nothing new, but in London and all over Europe, medical men were not just seeing how the body worked, but they were now heading into the world of pathological anatomy, meaning dissecting as a way of finding the cause of death. So now imagine that one day some of the leading surgeons in the world are doing their thing, and in walks a man and tells them to wash their hands. They think this guy is tripping, to use today's parlance, and laugh him out of the hospital. This guy wasn't tripping at all, and in fact, we can thank him for changing the world. We can thank him for saving countless lives, and that's why he's sometimes called the savior of mothers. It was the doctors who were ignorant and deluded. We also bet that most of you guys have never heard of this hero, how he changed the world, but how he died so savagely. We guarantee you this is one of the best stories you've never heard. The man we're talking about was one Ignaz Semmelweis, and he was born on the 1st of July 1818 in what's now today's Budapest, the capital city of Hungary. He got himself a medical degree and then focused on a branch of medicine called obstetrics. If you don't know what that is, it's concerned with childbirth. Okay, so this guy was one of those heroic surgeons you're thinking. The answer is no. Semmelweis actually went to work as an assistant professor at the first obstetrical clinic of the Vienna General Hospital. This was the year 1846, and the city of Vienna was a center of science and art. At this time, a lot of poor women or prostitutes were getting pregnant and then killing the baby. This is known as infanticide, and was quite common back then. The clinic where our good doctor worked would actually take in pregnant women and help even bring up the child. This was the deal. The hospital said, hey, come have your child here, and our new doctors and nurses can learn a thing or two and you get free childcare. You have to also remember that a lot of women died during childbirth back then. Those doctors and midwives really needed that training. But Semmelweis soon started noticing something really weird. There was a first and a second clinic at the hospital, and Semmelweis saw that way more women died after giving birth at the first clinic. In fact, everyone knew this. The women would beg to be sent to the second clinic. Some of them even gave birth outside of the hospital and pretended that they'd accidentally had the child on the way to the hospital. That way they could still get free childcare. Other women actually got on their knees and pleaded with the doctors not to send them to that deadly first clinic. The place was a veritable death trap, and Semmelweis and the women knew this only too well. You see, those women who died after giving birth were dying of something called puerperal fever, aka childbed fever. It's a fever that a woman gets because of a uterine infection after giving birth. What really shocked Semmelweis is that more women in the first clinic were getting this than those giving birth in the streets. Surely, the clinic must be a safer environment, he thought. The man then started looking at the data. He saw that some of the wards were staffed by midwives, some by medical students, and some by trained doctors. Guess what? Way more women died that had been treated by the most educated people, the doctors. Women were 5 times less likely to get the deadly fever if their baby was delivered by a midwife. What is this deformity of reason, wondered Semmelweis, and so he started doing some rounds at the wards. He noticed one major difference, and that was that at the midwives' wards, the women had kids on their side, and in the doctor's clinic, they gave birth on their backs. Okay, thought Semmelweis, that's just a matter of angles, and he ordered all women now give birth on their sides. Did it work? No, they still kept dying at the same rate at the doctor's clinic. He was lost for an explanation, but then he saw that after a woman died in the first clinic, a priest would walk up and down the wards ringing a bell. For whatever reason, we don't know, but Semmelweis wondered if the sound of a death bell stressed the women, and this somehow made them sick. He stopped the bell ringing for a while. This, of course, was a long shot, but it didn't work. Semmelweis became so frustrated by all of this that he actually took a bit of time off and got some fresh air in the Austrian countryside. Still, it bugged him every day. Why were all those women dying in that one clinic? It just made no sense. Then, when he got back to the hospital, he received more bad news. His friend, a pathologist, had just died. He'd been doing an autopsy on a woman who had died from childbed fever. He pricked his finger during that autopsy and his blood had mixed with hers. He subsequently got a fever and later died. Semmelweis then noticed something. His friend, the pathologist, had had the same symptoms as someone with childbed fever. It was a bit of a eureka moment. He knew that the fever wasn't just something that pregnant women could get, but it was some kind of thing that could be spread. Then he had his second eureka moment. He realized that the doctors at the first clinic did a lot of autopsies, but that the midwives at the second clinic didn't. He thought about his dead pathologist friend and started connecting the dots. This disease, he hypothesized, can be carried from one person to another. This may all seem very elementary to you guys watching, but you have to remember that germ science wasn't invented yet. Physicians had for years written theories about how diseases were spread, but microorganisms and pathogens were not understood. Semmelweis considered that in some of those cadavers that were being dissected, there were small particles of disease. After digging around, a doctor would transfer that disease with his own hands to a pregnant woman. Particles from the corpse's blood was getting into the woman's blood, and then she died, infected from a dead person, with the vector being the good but ignorant doctor. Semmelweis then told everyone to wash their hands with soap and water, and after that, chlorine solution. The latter is actually an amazing disinfectant, but Semmelweis didn't know that because he didn't really understand germs. He just told them to use it because it cleared up the smell of the corpses on the doctor's hands. What happened next, of course, was that suddenly lots of women were not getting the fever at the first clinic. Hand washing was a success. Women no longer begged to be taken to the second clinic or secretly had their babies in the streets. Semmelweis told the medical community at large. He said, "Guys, you know what? Washing our hands saves lives. I have the data to prove this. It's incontestable. You guys doing autopsies are spreading the disease around. In fact, everyone should start washing their hands. It somehow stops diseases spreading." They thought he was mad. And being the kings of the medical community, some of the leading surgeons totally dismissed Semmelweis' idea. What? Some surgeons thought? You're saying that we, the lifesavers, the front line of medical science, are actually killing people? Yeah, said Semmelweis. Please wash your hands. He made a lot of enemies. Semmelweis was right, but he was also quite obsessed. He ranted and raved about washing hands. He shouted from the rooftops, and the higher-ups in the medical community didn't like it. They didn't much like him. Here was an upstart trying to say doctors killed their patients because they carried invisible monsters on their hands. Was that science or witchcraft? He actually got fired from the hospital, and yes, of course, pregnant women started dying again. That's because doctors stopped washing their hands. Semmelweis was smeared and called a loon. They did a number on him, berated him as if he was some crazy charlatan spreading misinformation. Science was about facts, they said. Observable facts, not tiny invisible particles traveling from dead bodies to pregnant women via a doctor. Semmelweis found it hard to get a job after that. They ruined him, and he was way ahead of all of them. He didn't give up at first, though. He left Austria and traveled around Europe, telling medical professionals that if they started washing their hands, then disease would spread less easily. No one believed him, or not many people. A few British scientists were actually on his side. Semmelweis knew that he could save lives, but hardly anyone was listening. We should say that some younger students and medical men did take notice of Semmelweis and try his disinfecting methods, but the old guard of science would not listen. They controlled the gates of change, and they weren't about to let a relatively unknown Hungarian man inside the highest of castles. Semmelweis ended up working back in Hungary, and he actually saved tons of lives at a hospital called St. Rochus. And that was because during an outbreak, he made people wash their hands. Well, he made them wash their hands all the time. The hospital mortality rate greatly improved after Semmelweis turned up armed with data and facts about soap and chlorine and the spread of disease. He was then given the post of professor of obstetrics at the University of Pest. But you know what? Those so-called leaders of science in Vienna still rejected him. Some of them even went as far as to say that Semmelweis talked utter nonsense. He didn't give up, though, and wrote a book called The Etiology, Concept, and Prophylaxis of Childbed Fever. This showed how his disinfecting regimes had saved lives already and could save millions more. The book was rejected by the medical community. When he gave talks around Europe, he was virtually booed off stage by the gray-bearded dinosaurs of medicine. We should say here that at the time, Semmelweis was relatively young for someone making breakthroughs. He was only in his mid-40s. He got angrier, and then one day, he just cracked. This might have been brought on by syphilis, but we don't know. It could have been stress. There are mixed opinions, but it's likely he had a mental breakdown due to being roundly rejected and knowing he could save so many people. At the age of 47, he was committed to a mental asylum and had died just a few months later. How he died is not so clear. It seems he had a wound on his hand. That wound got infected, and this led to sepsis and then death. The reason he got that wound, though, is quite upsetting, seeing what this great man had achieved. You see, he was actually lured to the mental asylum by a famous Austrian physician named Ferdinand Ritter von Hebra. He told Semmelweis that he wanted to take him there to see a patient. Once Semmelweis realized there was no patient and he had fallen for a trap, he tried to escape. The guards put him in a straitjacket and subsequently beat him quite badly. He was thrown into a dark cell, occasionally doused in cold water, and that wound on his hand festered until his blood was poisoned. 2 decades after Semmelweis died, Louis Pasteur, the famous French biologist and microbiologist, would confirm that Semmelweis was indeed right. Pasteur proved that infectious particles spread disease, and certainly that of childbed fever. His experiments in germ theory, that of pathogens spreading disease, were groundbreaking, and they proved that Semmelweis had been right all along. British scientist Joseph Lister, who's now called the father of antiseptic medicine, some years later said Semmelweis should be hailed as a hero. Finally, medical science believed him. Lister wrote, "I think with the greatest admiration of him and his achievement, and it fills me with joy that at last he's given the respect due to him." Sometimes the old guard just reject new groundbreaking ideas, and that still happens today. But there's a happy ending to this story, because when that happens and it turns out that the larger intellectual community is wrong, we have a term for what they suffer from. That term is the Semmelweis reflex. Ever have déjà vu? You know, that feeling that what you're currently doing is something that you already did before, only the memory of it just comes to you now in the present? It's a common occurrence that scientists still can't explain, and one experienced by millions of Americans every year. Sometimes it can be unsettling, other times it's just a mild curiosity. But now imagine having déjà vu not about something you're currently doing, but about an entire life lived. John and Florence Pollock were a working-class couple from Britain who were in no overt regard extraordinary by any means. Soon after getting married, the young couple had a daughter, Joanna, born in 1946, followed 5 years later by a second daughter, Jacqueline. Joanna, as the older sister, was closely bonded to Jacqueline and would mother her constantly. The children grew up as normal, happy children, though Joanna would often be prone to a particularly unsettling statement. The normally happy little girl would sometimes stop what she was doing and muse aloud, "I will never be a lady," implying that she would never grow up. At 3 years old, Jacqueline suffered an accident and fell into an empty bucket, earning her a gash on her forehead right over her right eye and close to her nose. The gash became a permanent scar, especially noticeable in the cold weather. The girl also had a prominent birthmark on the left side of her body at the waist. These details would become incredibly important just a few years later. On the morning of May 7, 1957, Joanna, age 11, Jacqueline, age 6, and a friend were walking to church. As the children walked together, they were blissfully unaware that just down the road, a mentally disturbed woman was barreling down on them. That woman had her children taken away from her, and in an attempt to commit suicide, she took large quantities of aspirin and phenobarbital, a medicine used to treat epilepsy. The large doses of medicine had not killed her, but rather completely impaired her mental state, and totally out of control, the woman barreled down the road and swerved onto the sidewalk straight at the children. Because of a wall next to the sidewalk that the two girls and their friend were on, they were unable to escape the oncoming car and were killed instantly. Their father, John, was utterly distraught at the death of his two daughters and believed that they had died as a punishment from God after he had prayed for proof of reincarnation. This was because John held a very peculiar view for a Christian, that sometimes God reincarnated people not as in returning from the dead, but completely reincarnated individuals into different bodies. John's wife did not believe this, and their marriage nearly ended when John insisted that God would return the girls as twins. Later that year, Florence became pregnant again, and this fueled John's belief that his twin girls would be returned to him. Florence, still extremely uncomfortable with the idea, utterly rejected this belief, and after careful observation, the family doctor predicted a single birth. This was based on observations on a palpitation of the fetus as well as its heartbeat, and the fact that neither John or Florence had a history of twins in their family. On October 4, 1958, though, incredibly and unexpectedly, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Jillian and Jennifer. Even more incredibly, Jennifer was born with a birthmark that closely resembled Jacqueline's scar above her eye, and a second birthmark in the exact same place as Jacqueline's own on her hip. Soon, rumors of the twin girls' reincarnation began to circulate about town and even made national press. A few years later, the story of the twins drew the attention of psychologist Ian Stevenson, who began an investigation into the matter. What he uncovered was shocking. At first, the twin girls behaved no differently than other young children until they turned 3. At that time, their parents gave them a box of toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, and Jillian claimed a doll for herself that had belonged to Joanna, and Jennifer claimed a doll that had belonged to Jacqueline. The little 3-year-old twins told their parents that the toys had been a gift from Santa Claus, which is exactly what John and his wife had told Joanna and Jacqueline when they had originally bought them years earlier. Further, Jillian spotted a toy clothes ringer and reached for it, saying, "There's my toy ringer." The ringer had also previously belonged to Joanna. The eeriness, however, would only build. The twins' mother would often overhear the twins discussing details of the accident that had killed their deceased siblings, with Jillian once holding Jennifer's head saying, "Blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." Indeed, when John went to identify the bodies of the dead children, Jacqueline's head had been bandaged right above her eyes. At a later time, Jillian pointed to Jennifer's forehead birthmark and said that was where Jennifer had been hurt when she fell in a bucket. Years earlier, while helping her husband run a milk delivery business, Florence had been seen to wear a large smock as she helped John. She had stopped wearing the smock when she found new work shortly after the death of her daughters and had put it away in a closet. Once, John put on the smock to protect his clothes as he did some house painting, and Jennifer asked him why he was wearing Mommy's coat. Dr. Stevenson would go on to find other disturbingly similar behavior between the twins and their dead sisters, which included a strong aversion to traffic, with the girls saying that the cars were going to kill them. Jillian also liked to mother Jennifer, the same as Joanna had mothered Jacqueline, and both twins looked up to their maternal grandmother as a mother figure, as Joanna and Jacqueline had done while growing up because their mother was busy working. Later in life, Dr. Stevenson would have the girls' DNA tested and discovered that they were monozygotic twins, meaning they came from the same egg. This, he claimed, meant that because the girls were identical genetically, Jennifer's birthmarks, which so closely resembled Jacqueline's scar and birthmark, couldn't be explained. Then, suddenly at around age 5, the memories of their deceased sisters completely ceased. Dr. Stevenson, who maintained lifelong contact with the family until his death, interviewed the girls again at age 20, and both girls expressed skepticism about reincarnation. In 1981, though, Jillian suddenly began experiencing what she called inner visions and perfectly described the house, garden, lawns, and orchards of the family home in Wickham, during which Joanna had grown up until age 4. Jillian, though, had never been there herself. To date, the Pollock twins case remains one of the strongest for the phenomenon of reincarnation, yet it's not without serious faults. For starters, Dr. Stevenson himself was not present for any of the alleged behaviors or statements that mirrored past behaviors or memories of the deceased girls, and instead had them relayed to him by the family. Given John Pollock's strong belief in reincarnation, he would hardly make for an unbiased witness. Skeptics argue that the girls could have simply learned the details of their deceased sisters' lives by overhearing adults talking about them, and may have turned it into a game of sorts. This would explain their loss of interest as they grew older, and the sudden end of these past life memories. However, the presence of Jennifer's birthmarks remains a thorny issue to try and explain away rationally. The Pollock twins were hardly the first possible reincarnated twins, however, and the most famous case before the Pollocks was that of Burmese twins Mongyi and Mongye. These two twin boys soon took to calling themselves Mong San Nin and Ma Gwyn when they learned to talk, much to the shock of their parents, who recognized the names as those of a couple that they had known but who had died. The children reported memories of the village that the deceased couple had lived in, Okshitgon, and to test the veracity of their memories, the parents took them to visit. Incredibly, the twins recognized the village and displayed an intimate knowledge of the layout of its streets, the houses, and even the people who lived there. They even remembered borrowing 2 rupees from a local woman, and when she asked about the debt, she confirmed that the deceased couple had in fact borrowed this money from her and died before repaying it. Closer to home, the most stunning case of reincarnation comes to us from recent years. In 2000, a young American boy named James Leininger fell in love with planes, especially World War II planes, after visiting a flight museum. Incredibly though, shortly after his visit, James, who wasn't yet 2 years old, displayed a knowledge of plane facts that stunned his parents. Taking him back to the plane museum, his parents reported that James began to have nightmares, and he would repeatedly shout, "Airplane crash on fire! Little man can't get out!" As James grew a little older, his parents asked him about the bad dreams. James said that they weren't dreams at all, but rather memories. James told his parents that they were his memories and that he had been shot down by the Japanese. He even identified the plane he flew as a Navy Corsair. At 2.5 years old, James told his parents that he had flown his plane from a big boat, calling it the Natoma. Incredibly, the US Navy had in fact operated an escort carrier off Japan, where James claimed he had been shot down, by the name of USS Natoma Bay. As Christmas neared, James's father was looking at a book that he was planning on gifting his own father called The Battle for Iwo Jima in 1945. As James's father flipped through the book, James pointed to a picture of the island showing Mount Suribachi and said, "That's where my airplane was shot down." As James got older, he began drawing battle scenes which involved airplanes, and would sign them James III. When asked why, he said it was because he was the 3rd James. Eventually, James's father got in contact with a veteran from the Natoma Bay and attended a reunion of surviving Natoma Bay crew. There he learned that toward the end of the war, on one of the ship's last missions at the Battle of Iwo Jima, a single pilot had gone missing and was presumed shot down by the Japanese, a 21-year-old named James M. Houston Jr. Even more incredibly though, the young James even gave the name of one of his wingmen, Jack Larson, who confirmed the events that led to James Houston Jr.'s death. As young James's case was investigated, he began to give details about James Houston Jr.'s family life, which prompted James's parents to contact any surviving relatives of Houston's. They found his sister, who after being told of the details James spoke of, confirmed many of them as factual. Skeptics who investigated the James Leininger case have been hard-pressed to come up with good explanations for the young boy's alleged past life memories. Today, a world of information is at our fingertips, but in the early 2000s, when James was growing up, gathering such specific details about World War II battles and daily life aboard an escort carrier would have been difficult, let alone for a child of only 3 years old. Even more difficult to explain, however, are the specifics of life aboard the Natoma Bay that were confirmed by veterans, or that a child barely old enough to read would even have known the name of a relatively obscure and small Navy escort carrier which happened to fight in the same place the young James claimed he had been shot down. Is reincarnation real? Certainly some cases can be looked at with a skeptical eye, and a strong argument for their falsification can be made. For the Pollock twins, their father's strong belief in reincarnation could have led to an accidental or purposeful hoax, and no solid evidence of the girls' experiences actually exists. The case of the Burmese twins can be more difficult to explain, yet given the lack of verification and single individual who studied and reported the case so long ago, details could have been easily exaggerated or outright invented. More difficult, though, is the case of James Leininger, which not only was extremely well documented but presented so many exacting details that no rational explanation can easily dispel as a hoax or a fantasy. Perhaps then there is life after death, or some people get second chances. "It's not working!" screams a medic as he administers a second dose of Narcan, an opioid overdose reversal agent, up the nose of a man who's been lying unconscious in the filthy street. The man's arms and legs are a map of painful weeping ulcers. A few feet away, a young woman barely looks up as she plunges a needle into the stump that was once her leg. This isn't a scene from a television show. This is the reality of today's inner cities. In today's episode of the Infographics Show, we'll look at the new street drug that rots your skin. The US has a serious drug problem, but there is one drug that's working its way across the country like a modern-day plague: xylazine, aka Tranq, sometimes referred to in the media as the zombie drug. Philadelphia's Kensington area was once a bustling community, but now it's a deindustrialized wasteland of drug-addled civic failure that's been called the Walmart of heroin. But it's xylazine that's becoming the drug of choice here. It's currently in about 90% of Kensington's entire drug supply, and as you'll see later, it's spreading its arms around America, and as of late has been causing havoc across the pond in Europe in places such as the UK, Estonia, and Latvia. Xylazine itself is a deadly serious matter, not only because of the adverse effects it has on the body, but because it doesn't respond to the medicines that can rescue someone from a potentially fatal overdose. It isn't an opioid, so Narcan or naloxone can't bring someone back from the dead if it's Tranq that's coursing through their system. Xylazine is not for human consumption. It's fit for horses, cows, pigs, and maybe your pet pit bull, but it certainly isn't supposed to be in you. Still, a drug that's used to sedate animals can just as easily calm down humans on the streets of Philadelphia and wherever else xylazine now calls home. It knocks you out, it makes you feel good, it helps you forget. It also causes ataxia, a loss of muscle control that affects coordination, which is why, in their euphoric stupor, users tend to lean forward with drooped arms in the style of flesh-eating zombies. It doesn't look like it from the outside, but this feeling is pleasurable and highly addictive. It does exactly what its users paid for, but this comes with the major drawback of some serious adverse side effects. If it doesn't kill you, it can create a situation where your body tissues start to die, aka necrosis. The injection sites can turn into small wounds in the skin, and those wounds can fester and turn into large infected, gaping ulcers. Users become hooked on a drug that can rot their bodies and cause vasoconstriction, a reduced blood flow to bodily tissues. Tracy McCann is a 39-year-old woman on the streets of Kensington whose skin started turning scaly after injecting what she thought was fentanyl. It was fentanyl, but like most batches these days, it was mixed with xylazine to give it that extra kick. As we'll soon show you, xylazine is also cheap, so traffickers mix it with other drugs, saving them money while killing off American citizens who usually don't know what's in their fent, smack, crack, crank, or fake prescription pills. McCann got hooked on pain meds after a car crash. In 2009, she met a guy in rehab, and he introduced her to heroin. Her story is a template for American drug addiction in what experts call the 3 waves of the opioid crisis. Wave 1, people got hooked on prescription pain pills. Wave 2, they went to the streets to find heroin when their well of pills ran dry. Wave 3, a tsunami of synthetic opioids washed over America. 10 years after her introduction to heroin, McCann switched to a more potent fentanyl, And in 2020, when xylazine had already made its way to the streets of Philadelphia, she soon found herself hanging out with people whose ulcerated arms and legs were covered in fleas and maggots. Even after watching a man get shot dead in front of her, she couldn't escape the grasp of xylazine. For everything it gives in pleasure, it takes back tenfold in pain. 38-year-old Brooke Pede lost her mother, sister, and wife all to drug overdoses. After being introduced to xylazine a few years back, she now navigates the human-cluttered sidewalks of Philly in her wheelchair, a result of her right leg being amputated from a xylazine injection wound that infected her bone. Yet, rather than face a harrowing withdrawal, she keeps injecting into mangled arms, whose tendons are exposed under pus-oozing flesh. How did it get to this? A situation seemingly a million times worse than in 1971, when President Richard Nixon said drugs were the U.S.'s new public enemy number one. By the end of the 1970s, there were about 3,000 drug overdoses a year in the U.S., compared to well over 100,000 a year in the 2020s. Well, newer and more powerful drugs are on the streets, and certainly one of the factors for the massive increase in overdose deaths. Over 2/3 of recent fatal American overdoses have involved synthetic drugs like fentanyl and xylazine. Xylazine has existed since the 1960s, but trials in humans were stopped because of the danger it posed. It caused serious respiratory depression and low blood pressure, so the FDA put up the red light. Humans just didn't think to use it to get high. It wasn't until 2018 that it started to become a mainstay in Kensington and some other areas around the US where drug dealers were selling it at $5 a shot, rather than the $10 for a shot of straight heroin. During the pandemic, usage soared as traffickers diverted more and more stocks of xylazine meant for beasts and pets to walking, talking Homo sapiens. But something far more worrying had to happen to create the dystopian present day, where thousands of xylazine deaths now happen each year, about 3/4 of them men. Traffickers started making xylazine themselves, rather than merely diverting veterinary supplies. This was when xylazine hotspots started to pop up in the 2020s, which according to the CDC were Delaware, the District of Columbia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, followed by regions along the East Coast such as those bruised and battered streets of Philadelphia. The latest data tells us that xylazine was found in drugs in 48 of 50 U.S. states. It keeps spreading and it doesn't look like it's going to go away anytime soon. In the UK, there were 11 xylazine deaths from 2022 to 2023. It wasn't just found in heroin samples, but in synthetic marijuana vapes and the fake codeine and Valium pills that pervade the poorer areas of many British towns and cities. Synthetics are the new normal, and there is no end in sight. They're cheap to make, hard to detect, and incredibly potent in minute quantities. According to the DEA, the precursor chemicals for xylazine have been coming from Chinese gangs, who've been selling it to Mexican drug cartels. The cartels then export it to gangs inside the US. At just $6 to $20 per kilogram, it's an affordable way to fatten a batch of heroin, fentanyl, or fake pills. The solution is made in makeshift labs on the other side of the US border. The labs keep expanding. The Breaking Bad-style chemists keep learning, and the American dream becomes a zombie-filled nightmare. The DEA recently called xylazine the deadliest drug threat our country has ever faced. And now cartels are mixing something even more potent than xylazine into their opioids. In 2024, there were reports in the US media about a stronger veterinary sedative that was being found in the blood of people who had overdosed. This drug, medetomidine, another animal tranquilizer, was said to be behind mass overdose outbreaks in Chicago. Like xylazine, it doesn't respond to Narcan. There have been cases in the ER when overdose victims had opiates, xylazine, and medetomidine in their blood, which is about as dangerous as playing Russian roulette 5 times in a row without reloading the bullet. With over 80% of the world's opioid users, the US is the main market for these creative criminal gangs. Gone are the days when they put all their effort into harvesting the pulp from opium poppies or farming marijuana, drugs that were safer than the killer concoctions on the streets in 2024. These synthetics are here to stay, finding a home where words like cheap and strong will always outweigh safety concerns. From anti-tank shells in awkward places to explosive candy disasters, here are the wildest sex accident ER stories directly from the doctors who had to deal with them. Number 14. A quick bang. In December 2021, an 88-year-old man from Gloucester, England arrived in the ER, where doctors quickly realized they needed backup from the Army bomb squad. The pervy pensioner had lodged a 57mm anti-tank munition up his butt. Rectum could have killed him. ER staff at Gloucestershire Royal were stumped, but the old man claimed he accidentally fell onto his military memorabilia collection, ass first, while naked. The grandpa just wanted to keep his dignity, but we know the truth. He was after a blast from the past. This is just another one of the countless insane sex accidents that medical professionals have to deal with on a daily basis. The old man was lucky enough to have the bomb removed from his butt without any lasting injuries. We're sorry to report that not everyone on this list is gonna be so lucky. Number 13. Trouser snake or trouser lizard? Dr. Katrina Nguyen shared a harrowing story of a hippie couple that turned up in the ER. The man was saying he had been unable to urinate for a few days. The guy's face was etched in panic, and Dr. Nguyen braced herself only to discover the most horrific cause imaginable. Apparently, his girlfriend wanted him to get wild in the bedroom, so our free-spirited flower child took it literally. Next thing you know, a legless lizard somehow wriggled its way up his urethra, parking itself in his bladder like it was moving in. Dr. Nguyen was able to extract the lizard, and we hope that the couple learned a lesson and made their bedroom a more vanilla affair. While you need a very specific set of circumstances to make that last one happen, no dong is safe from our next horrifying accident. Number 12. A stiff setback. ER doctor/medical TikTok celebrity Joe Whittington told the story of an unfortunate 20-year-old fella who suffered a penis fracture due to poor bedroom aim. While doing the dirty, he heard a loud popping sound and felt a sudden wave of unimaginable pain. According to Dr. Whittington, quote, "It was his first sexual encounter, and he recounted how during the intense activity, his penis slipped out and bent forcefully against his partner's pelvic bone." Feel free to take a second to scream after hearing that. We know we did. There's no actual bones in a boner, it's just blood and wishful thinking. The magic happens when the blood fills the corpora cavernosa, special tubes with an outer layer known as the tunica albuginea. A fracture happens when that layer tears, usually mid-thrust. Now let's move on to the next one before we all puke. Number 11. Love's tight grip. In another tale from the horrifying career of Dr. Whittington, we're gonna add a new phrase to your vocabulary today: penis captivus. This incredibly rare phenomenon can occur in the heat of passion when the vaginal opening tenses around an erect penis, effectively locking the now unhappy couple together. It's your very own passion prison. When Dr. Whittington encountered this, he used muscle relaxants to help slowly pull the couple apart. It's the one time you'd be grateful to a stranger for breaking up you and your girlfriend. Number 10. Love sucks. No one likes a bad kisser, but if your girlfriend's rockin' vampire powers, a bite and suck could be deadly. It sounds wild, but it really happened to Julio Macias Gonzalez, a 17-year-old boy from Mexico City. Julio's 24-year-old girlfriend, which is already a pretty sus age gap, gave him a hickey on his neck, causing a blood clot to form in a major artery. The clot traveled up to his brain later that night, causing seizures and then death. This isn't unprecedented either. A 44-year-old woman suffered a stroke that left one of her arms paralyzed, with doctors believing it was very likely the result of another love bite-induced blood clot. So be careful who you let near your neck. But sometimes the pain comes a little lower. Number 9. Getting spicy south of the border. Dr. Gabe Wilson, an emergency physician in Southeast Texas, told the horrifying story of a woman who had to be treated for mild burns around her genital region. Why? Because her partner had indulged in some particularly spicy food before deciding to take things down south. Ouch! And somehow that's still not the worst food vagina mishap. Dr. David Myers of Newport Beach, California, told the tale of a married couple trying to spice it up at night alone while someone was babysitting their newborn. They decided to celebrate by incorporating a beloved candy classic, Pop Rocks, applied in some of the wife's most sensitive areas. You could probably already see where this nightmare is going. With the addition of the husband's saliva, all the candy went off at once, like Willy Wonka's firecrackers. This led to the wife experiencing painful irritation, swelling, and burning sensation. Thankfully, after the area had been cleaned and an antihistamine had been prescribed, she made a full recovery. Time to keep that Whole Foods boudoir vibe going. Number 8. When life gives you melons. It's no secret that couples look for a little boost in the bedroom. One quick Google search serves up a buffet of questionable tips, everything from oysters to ground-up tigers promising to turn you into a legend in the sheets. Trust us, they won't. But Andy and Cynthia, a couple featured on TLC's Sex Sent Me to the ER, decided to take a watermelon for a spin. After hearing about the supposed aphrodisiac powers of the fruit, Andy rubbed some watermelon juice on his no-no zone. Turns out mid-romp was a terrible time to learn that she is severely allergic to watermelon. She came out okay, but it was one hell of an embarrassing visit to the ER. Think these sexcapades hit peak crazy? Leave your comments below and then stick around to see if things get wilder. Number 7. The Big O No. A Seattle woman identified only as Liz took "I'll have what she's having" way too far when she got caught in the throes of a soul-rocking orgasm. What started as pure bliss with her partner Eric turned into panic as the sensation just wouldn't quit. After 1 hour, she was concerned. After 2, she was panicked, and by 3, she was on her way to the ER. Her physical symptoms were so intense that doctors thought she was going into labor, only for the throes to mercifully subside. Incredible work, Eric. But Liz was lucky at least her mega orgasm wasn't literally blinding. The same couldn't be said for a 29-year-old man from Southampton, England, whose night of passion left him literally half blind. A blood vessel behind his retina burst due to the pressure building up during his, quote, vigorous sexual intercourse. This was made worse by him holding his breath during the climax, a surprisingly common thing among men. How about another dingling wounded in the line of duty? No? Too bad, it's happening again. Number 6. Brace yourself. Dr. Robert Hartman, a urology specialist in Lake Forest, Illinois, had a run-in with a severely swollen penis experiencing some very uncomfortable-looking irritation. He also had abrasions on the skin of his shaft. What could have been behind this nasty situation? As it turned out, the patient, a mortified college freshman, confessed to receiving a little bit of oral love from another freshman with braces on her teeth. The braces covered the man's schlong in tiny cuts, which then got infected by the woman's saliva and the bacteria in her mouth. Thankfully, some antibiotics solved the problem and the freshman's little soldier was free to enjoy college life. But sex doesn't always have to be a team sport. Number 5. Getting hard. Literally. Let's return to the classic staple of sex accidents, some guy putting something up his butt that really shouldn't be up his butt. Back in 1987, a man earned a place in multiple medical textbooks when he turned up at a hospital with a hard, stony mass in his rectum. Did he have a hardcore one-night stand with Michelangelo's David? No, he'd somehow done something even more bizarre. After mixing a large vat of cement, his boyfriend, for reasons unknown, helped pour it into his butt. There was also a ping pong ball in there for some reason, but hey, who are we to judge a DIY project? After a night of intense pain, physicians were able to remove the large, hardened wad of concrete from the patient's body. We actually have a picture of it here if you feel like having your day ruined by the mental image. Let's get away from orifices for a bit before we lose our collective lunches. Number 4. Bravo! Sometimes you can have an accident even when you're just trying to get ready for sex. A 27-year-old guy from the UK broke his middle finger while trying to unhook his partner's bra. His finger got stuck behind the double straps that extended to the left breast. Short, but definitely not sweet for that unfortunate lovebird. Mixing sex and foreign objects often leads to disaster, even more so when that object in question is a dumbbell weight. Number 3. Getting swole. A gym bro in the town of Worms, northern Germany, decided he didn't want to skip Johnson Day, so he decided to stick his favorite appendage through the middle of the weight, and then it got stuck there. No pain, no gain, but a whole lot of embarrassment. Doctors and firefighters were able to liberate the lifter's entombed tallywhacker with the help of a grinder and a vibrating saw. If the thought of having either of those tools anywhere near your privates rightly terrifies you, do not copy this guy. Speaking of terrifying, here are 3 terrifying words when paired together. Sudden, coital, death. Yep, that's a thing, and you're about to learn about it. Number 2. The ultimate happy ending. Death by copulation can be rare, thankfully, but for men in particular, there is a risk of sudden massive heart attack. Strangely, in the incidences where the sudden coital death does occur, it often happens to men in the midst of extramarital affairs. This has become such a pattern that researchers have taken an interest in it. The running theory is the stress and the guilt of sneaking around cranks up the strain on the heart, which makes a heart attack way more likely during high-stakes cardio, like a secret romp. It's another good reason to not cheat on your wife, guys. That, and it's just a real douche move. After all of these highly risky sexcapades, you might be thinking, maybe I'll keep it PG and stick to kissing. But that is where you're wrong, bucko. Turns out you can get injured while sucking face too, as one horrifying incident from China is about to demonstrate. Number 1. Lip locked and ear blocked. In 2008, a 20-year-old woman from Zhuhai in Guangdong province was rushed to the hospital after mysteriously losing the hearing in her left ear. Doctors were stumped until she told them about the passionate makeout session she recently shared with her boyfriend. The force of the kissing reduced the pressure inside the woman's mouth, pulling out her eardrum and leaving her suddenly deaf. While she was expected to regain full hearing within 2 months, it is certainly not an ideal outcome for what was meant to be some harmless smooching. So, if you truly want to be safe while spending private time with your loved one, maybe just keep it to meaningful eye contact and then watch a movie together. Think these sex accidents are wild? Got a crazier story? Leave them in the comments. We are ready for the chaos. In 2010, a 29-year-old British construction worker was hard at work at the construction site. He'd followed all the necessary safety rules and was wearing a hard hat and a pair of sturdy steel toe-cap boots. But then he made the bad decision of jumping 6 feet from the scaffold to the floor. He looked down and to his horror, a 6-inch nail had penetrated his boot and gone right through his foot. The poor guy howled in pain and he was rushed to the emergency room. It was unbearable, and so he was given a pain reliever. That didn't do anything to stop the agony, and the doctors then gave him the strongest pain medication they had, fentanyl. After this, they carefully cut off the man's boot. But guess what? The nail had gone between his toes. What was all that screaming about then? Number 10. The nocebo patients. So coming in at number 10 is one of the strangest things that have happened in the emergency room. That's people coming in screaming and shouting and pleading with the doctors to stop the intense pain. Except, as with the case of that construction worker, they shouldn't be in any pain. What's the reason, you're wondering? And the answer is something called the nocebo effect. You've all heard of the placebo effect, such as when someone is given a pill that's a dud, but it seems to work for them. The nocebo effect is kind of like a negative version of that. Nothing has happened to them, but the brain tells them something is wrong. That construction worker just saw a nail that looked as though it had gone through his foot, so he believed he was in great pain. The pain, of course, was kind of real, even though that nail had just gone through a gap in his toes. It was all in his head. The nocebo effect is actually quite common when people take certain kinds of drugs. They complain of side effects that just couldn't happen. It's all in their head, and in the world of healthcare, such imaginings cost money and time. We found another case of a man that had a fight with his girlfriend, and so he took an overdose of pills. He was rushed to the hospital and things were looking bad. His blood pressure was very low and the man seemed to be about to pass out. It turned out that the drugs he had taken were actually placebo drugs, but the man's doctor hadn't told him that. Once the guy was told this, he suddenly started getting a lot better and his blood pressure went back to normal. This is no doubt a weird kind of situation at the emergency room, but as you'll see, things can get really messy in there too. Number 9. A man's worst nightmare. We will apologize to you guys in advance for telling you this tale. It's not something you'll easily forget. The story comes from a former United States Army surgical nurse, and she was once asked what the strangest thing she'd seen in regard to accidents. She said one day she got a visit from a middle-aged guy who had decided to perform a bit of surgery on himself. You see, this guy had been in terrible pain due to having kidney stones. In some cases, a person might have very small kidney stones and just pee them out without much discomfort. But if those stones are big, well, they can cause a lot of pain. This guy had been in extreme pain, and for some reason he thought he could perform a little operation himself to get them out. He basically inserted a glass tube into his urethra, you know, that bit of your manhood that carries the urine. The thing is, his muscle contracted and that tube got stuck inside. And if that wasn't bad enough, it then shattered inside him. Removing those tiny shards of glass was quite the job for doctors who treated him. And all we'll say is, kids, don't try that at home. Number 8. The desperate drinker. This was the case of a homeless man who had been taken to a hospital after being found a little bit too drunk. He was in a bad way, and it's not that uncommon for people to die from drinking too much. His blood was checked to see just how much was in his system, and he was then left in the bed. A bit later, and another test was performed, but the results shocked the nurses. The level of alcohol in his blood had spiked. The staff then thoroughly checked the room and they couldn't find a source of alcohol. So where was this guy getting his fix from? One of the nurses then went to a computer to see if anything like this had happened in other hospitals. Indeed it had, and the reason was there had been other cases when people had drunk the alcohol in hand sanitizer in the room. He went back to that man's room and found this guy had done the same. He drunk the entire contents. We found cases of teenagers doing this, and in New Zealand, prisoners had been doing it while incarcerated. It's really not a good thing to do and can be dangerous. In 2012 in California, 6 teens ended up in the ER after deciding they'd try and get drunk on hand sanitizer. After that, a medical toxicology consultant from the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles said the teens had been looking on the internet to find the method to best extract the booze. This is another case of when we can say, kids, don't try this at home or anywhere. Number 7. The foreign object problem. It's well known that a lot of people have been sent to the emergency room to have something removed from the place that our food waste comes out of. In fact, there are hundreds of stories of this happening, and there's even a book called Stuck Up, which is a collection of x-rays and stories about people who have got something stuck up in their rear end. The list of weird objects is a long one, and these strange cases were happening a long time before guys in those Jackass movies were doing it for fun. So what's the weirdest thing doctors have ever had to remove? We can't say what the number one spot is, but when doctors found a man who had a Buzz Lightyear doll stuffed inside him, we guess even for them it was somewhat unique. The foreign object problem seems to happen mostly to people aged 20 to 40, by the way, so maybe some of you are in danger right now. Number 6. The Lego Eaters. So a handful of adults might display some strange behavior and get things stuck in them, but some young kids can hardly be blamed for putting things inside their mouth. Many news reports tell us that the snack of choice for kids all over the world is Lego. A problem is choking, of course, but many times the small pieces do come out the other end. We found one account of a kid who ate 60 pieces, so he really must have liked the stuff. A major problem, though, is the possibility of harmful substances in the Lego bricks. A British study said that some Lego bricks they tested contained cadmium and selenium or chromium and antimony. The worst culprits were yellow and red Lego bricks found in older sets. Since so many kids end up swallowing Lego, a bunch of doctors at the Royal London Hospital in England swallowed some themselves to see what harm it could cause. Thankfully, all the doctors were fine. They didn't get sick and just dropped off their piece at the pool. Now, things will get bloodier. Number 5. The calmest patient ever. When ER staff were asked on one forum to talk about the strangest days they had, one British nurse said he was once in an apartment and a man just walked in casually looking a bit lost. The staff asked him, "Can we help you?" The man then looked down at his side where his arm was covered with a blanket. He then told them, "I seem to have lopped my arm off." The staff didn't believe him because the guy was so calm about it all. They asked him to remove the blanket, and to their shock, when he pulled the blanket away, a detached arm went with it. He then looked at them and said, "Told you." Number 4. Life and death. You can find quite a few cases of when a pregnant woman died but the baby inside her was delivered. One particularly sad story happened in 2019 in London. A pregnant woman was stabbed and rushed to the emergency room. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. Unfortunately, the doctors couldn't save her, but they did deliver her baby. We found a similar case in the USA, which also happened not too long ago. In this case, 3 people were shot, and one of them was a woman who was 35 weeks pregnant. She was rushed to the hospital but died. The baby survived but was in critical condition. Such a thing must be heartbreaking for the emergency room workers, but at least they could save one life. That might be sad, but now we have something wonderful to tell you. Number 3. Coming back to life. You might not have heard about something called Lazarus syndrome. It's when the resuscitation efforts on a patient have failed and the person has been declared dead. That's it. They did everything they could. Sometimes the machines are turned off and it's just another loss of life on another hectic day in the emergency room. But then doctors and nurses are shocked when the person comes back to life. This happened to a 27-year-old man in the UK. He had overdosed but was given a shot of something to help bring him out of his unconscious state. They got the man to the hospital, but he went into cardiac arrest and died. All efforts to revive him failed and he was pronounced dead. About a minute later, and something unbelievable happened. His heart started beating again. This time he was revived and the man survived. In 2013, the US media reported a miracle happened to a man named Anthony Yale. An ambulance was called for this 37-year-old man when his family couldn't wake him up. They administered CPR and got his heart going again, but at the emergency room, he couldn't be resuscitated and was declared dead. His son was called and he went into the hospital and didn't expect to find a living father. One of the doctors then noticed something strange. The heart monitor seemed to show a tiny sign of a heartbeat, but that was just like a little blip. That blip happened again and then turned into a trickle. The doctors were astonished and got to work on him again. Eventually, the man's heart started working. The doctors later told the media that this kind of thing in clinical terms just doesn't happen. One doctor said, "I'm calling it a miracle because I've never seen anything like it." The National Institutes of Health said the Lazarus syndrome is very rare and often can't be easily explained. In some cases, the bodies weren't even near staff when the person came back to life, and in at least one case, the person was in the mortuary. Number 2. The survivors. Sometimes in the emergency room, people shock the doctors by not succumbing to what looked like fatal injuries. One doctor wrote that he was very surprised when one man he attended to had been shot 3 times in the head. The doctor said he looked dead and could see that he'd been shot in the temple and twice in the face. He believed the guy's life was over. But it turned out that all those bullets had exited and somehow not damaged the man's brain. This is what the doctor wrote on a forum. I go to examine him and tilt his head back, and he says, "Yo, be gentle." I jump back and scream like a little boy, as did everyone in the room. Literally, the bullets missed his brain in every single shot. Stranger things have happened. In 1995, a man in North Carolina named Kenny Vaughn was shot 20 times and he lived to tell the tale. In 2006, a guy named Joseph Guzman survived 19 gunshot wounds. The rapper you all know, named 50 Cent, survived after being shot 9 times. A surgeon told the New York Times that being shot multiple times, especially 20 times, and nothing hitting a vital organ is very rare indeed. For the finale, we'll tell you a story that's from the darkest recesses of ER history. Number 1. Man's best friend. This was posted on a forum where ER workers compared their horror stories. The man said he worked as a surgeon and he got used to seeing some gory things. So did the nurses too, and they don't usually go pale at the sight of blood since fixing people is their job. But one day, the surgeon said he saw some nurses come out of the emergency room and their expressions were unusual. They seemed in shock. It turns out the patient was a homeless man who had been attacked by dogs, but those dogs had basically taken big pieces of this guy. The surgeon said this is what he saw. The arm was totally gone. He still had the interosseous tendon holding the tibia to the fibula, hard to eat I guess, but otherwise just intact leg bones completely free of flesh. His feet were also mostly gone. The guy actually survived, albeit with bits of him missing. This just shows how hard it can be to work in the emergency room, but also what great job those people do. Maybe you were an underachiever in life. Good news, because thanks to modern science, you can finally accomplish something more than a sick 360 no-scope Call of Duty headshot while living in your parents' basement. All you have to do is die, and if you're really lucky, you'll end up helping the US military out. Humans have hacked other humans apart for a variety of fun reasons since we left the trees in Africa for the open savannas. Typically, our primary reason was war, or just plain old-fashioned murder. But one day, several thousand years ago, the first true medical students got an idea. What if we hacked the human body apart so we could learn how to put it back together again? Sort of. And just like that, the science of anatomy was born. Some of the ancient people who would put the knowledge of anatomy to best use were the Egyptians, who had a variety of shockingly advanced surgical treatments for various ailments. Sadly, primitive medical knowledge still meant most of these patients died anyway, mostly because humans had yet to discover the concept of washing one's hands before shoving them inside the intestines of another. But ancient Egyptians' anatomical expertise was of even better use when you're dead, as they skillfully sliced open corpses to remove and preserve organs during mummification in order to help prevent decay. The science of anatomy would have little effect on improving the lives of the living for several thousand more years, however, when it exploded in popularity during the late 18th century and early 19th century. Empiricism led to the establishment of what we today call modern scientific methods, and this required research and experimentation, a lot of it. There was just one problem for the budding anatomist. They needed bodies to work on, and families were extremely frowny-faced about handing over loved ones to be mutilated in front of an audience. Some donated bodies were received from time to time, but doctors faced yet another problem. People were taking an almost obscene amount of time to die. If you were healthy, you might even live as long as 25 before dying to cholera, or in a horrifying industrial accident, or in Europe's favorite pastime, war. Surgeons circumvented the lack of bodies by simply stealing them. Other less scrupulous surgeons gladly paid others for donated bodies which they knew were being robbed from freshly dug graves. Often doctors would even turn a blind eye to very obvious murder victims. Such was the hunger for bodies to experiment on. Eventually, the government decided enough poor people had been murdered and sold to medical schools and changed the law to allow only donations. This law stands until today in most nations. But what exactly happens when you donate your body to science? Well, first of all, not just anyone can donate their body to science. There are various concerns over the risks your body might pose even after you vacated it. On your quest to become an elaborate prop in some medical student's freshman prank, you'll first have to undergo a screening while still alive. The screening will dive deep into your medical history and include blood work to test you for every disease under the sun. As you'll soon be in the hands of bumbling first-year medical students who won't know your ass from a hole in the ground, there's a serious concern about accidentally contaminating those working on your body. Conditions such as HIV/AIDS, hepatitis B or C, COVID-19, and other highly contagious diseases are an automatic disqualifier, as is being severely overweight or underweight, though occasionally there are special requests for obese donations in order to test new medical devices. That's right, your body won't just go to be clumsily hacked apart by medical students, but could be used to test new medical devices. Testing new medical technology inside living humans is morally challenging due to possible unforeseen malfunctions or unintended consequences. Surgeons, however, also have to learn how to implant the latest doohickey inside a still living person that will hopefully remain still living after the procedure. And that's where your chump corpse comes in. Surprisingly though, age doesn't matter when it comes to body donation. Even if you're extremely old or young, your corpse can be of some use to medical science. There are, of course, extremely old or extremely young people far luckier than you whom a new surgical procedure or medical treatment could help keep alive. Once your screening is complete, your information is kept on file until the day you kick the bucket. Then, instead of going to a funeral home to be embalmed, your body is picked up by the agency you're registered to, who immediately gets to work on preserving your body without actually damaging it with harsh chemicals such as those used at funeral homes. When your body's prepared by a funeral home, a devil's brew of chemicals is used to make you appear lifelike as you rest in your coffin for a final farewell. You'll look the picture of perfect health, even though you're dead, and full of more chemicals than an American supermarket meat. You'll instead go to a freezer where you'll sometimes stay for up to 3 years, until the need arises. After that period, your remains will be cremated free of charge to your family, who can then do with your ashes as they like. If your family is even remotely cool, they'll have you made into a firework. However, if you fit the bill for any number of cadaver requests, you could go on to briefly live a second life in a number of exciting adventures. Your body could be used to practice robotic surgery, as in robots practicing to do the surgery, not practicing doing surgery on robots where you would be completely useless. With the advent of artificial intelligence and telemedicine, the field of robotic surgery is rapidly growing, and you could help pave the way for a future of surgical pods, like the one in the awful Alien movie starring Michael Fassbender. Actually, there's 2 of those at this point. Turns out people are super wary about letting robots hack away at their bodies, so corpses are perfect for letting our future Terminator overlords learn the best way to take apart the human body. You could also, however, end up helping a new surgeon learn his trade or testing laser treatment for acne. That plague on your face may help keep other young teenagers from suffering the humiliation of adolescent pizza face. But if you're really lucky, you'll finally get to do something really cool with your body. The US military is in the business of politely asking people in other countries to stop doing things we don't like by blowing them up or shooting them full of holes. In order to advance the science of blowing people up or shooting them full of holes, occasionally the US military is in need of cadavers, and that's where you come in. You can help test new weapons by getting shot at. While ballistic gel molds can give us a lot of information about how new weapons perform by simulating human bodies, there's nothing quite like the real thing. Shooting up cadavers can allow military scientists to gather extremely accurate data on how to improve existing weapon designs or even how to help treat and save lives by those wounded by similar weapons. This is the case with the controversial US Army blast experiments, which have for years used corpses of all ages and sizes to test the effects of various explosives on the human body. One man in Arizona was shocked to discover that his dead mother, who had agreed to donate her body to science, had been used to test the effects of IEDs on the human body under various levels of protection. While her son was livid enough to take legal action, by all accounts his mother had a blast. This type of weapon testing is incredibly useful in both creating better weapons and helping protect our troops and save lives, even if it's not exactly the type of science most donors think they'll be helping advance. Some donation agencies allow a donor to opt out of any related testing, but due to the low number of donors, body brokers typically simply leave this possibility out of the brochure for prospective donors. Your body, however, could also be used in industry and government-run safety tests. Vehicle manufacturers may turn to the use of cadavers to test new safety features of a vehicle, or the government could order a round of crash tests using real human bodies to assess new safety procedures or regulations. These tests may sound garish to the still living, but they've helped save countless lives and prevented millions of crippling injuries. Perhaps most surprising of all about donating your body to science, though, is the fact that you're not likely to end up in one piece. Cadavers are frequently dismembered, as various customers need different body parts to experiment on or to complete their shrunken head collection. Your legs may go to a research facility working on new treatments for broken bones, while your hands go to a medical school so surgeons can practice reattaching severed fingers. While legally the donor facility is required to collect all of the remains after their use is over and hand over the cremated ashes to your family, we can realistically assume that there's not a snowball's chance in hell anybody is taking the time to gather up your remains from the far-flung corners of the US. Your family will likely instead receive ashes that are probably, maybe mostly you, along with a few bits of other strangers that they had lying around and needed to get rid of. From having a giant needle plunged into your spine to getting your skin ripped off over and over again, these are the 15 most painful medical procedures someone can possibly go through. The crazy thing is, some of them are not all that uncommon. Number 15. The first procedure on our list is a type of elective surgery. This means people choose to go through the pain of having it done. Liposuction involves removing fat from the body. This may be done for a couple of reasons. Some people want to change the way they look and feel, so they decide that certain areas of their bodies need to be reshaped. Many people who decide to get liposuction have the fat removed from under the arms or around the thighs. Regardless of where the procedure is occurring, the fat needs to get sucked from the body, and this is going to hurt a lot. The procedure itself starts with a needle being inserted into the area where the liposuction will take place. The problem with this is that people who get lipo often want to remove fat from sensitive areas of the body. This means before the actual procedure even begins, the patient will be in discomfort. The first step of the procedure is that a needle filled with saline solution to help fluids and fats solidify in the region is stuck into the body. After this happens, the doctor squeezes a tube under the skin and literally sucks out the fat. Depending on the location and amount of fat that needs to be removed, the whole process can take several hours. Most liposuction patients are given local anesthesia, meaning they will remain awake for the entire procedure. But if the tube is not in the right position or the doctor is sloppy, the pain can be excruciating as tissues connected to the fat are also sucked out. Even if all goes well, after the procedure is complete, the area of your body that was operated on will bruise and be tender from the violence of having your insides hoovered out, so the pain will continue for several more days. If blood or needles makes you squeamish, this next procedure will probably freak you out. Number 14. Arterial blood gas tests require a medical professional to extract blood from an artery using a syringe. The main difference between this procedure and what happens when you donate blood is the location where the fluid needs to come from. Normally, blood is taken from your veins, but since this test is often used to measure the amount of oxygen in your blood, the needle needs to be stuck into an artery. The most common location for blood to be taken during arterial blood gas tests is from the wrist, but sometimes it needs to be extracted from an artery near the groin or the inside of the arm. Since arteries tend to be slightly further under the skin, the needle needs to puncture deeper into the body than typical blood draw. The deeper the needle goes, the more painful the experience. The other part of an arterial blood gas test that makes it so uncomfortable is that the amount of blood needed to make an accurate assessment means the procedure can take a while. So if you think a normal blood draw is painful, imagine having to sit through several minutes of a large bore needle buried 2 inches into your groin. Like needles, how about needles and drills in your mouth? Number 13. Having dental work done is rarely pleasant, but there's one oral procedure that hurts more than all the rest: dental implants that are given to patients who need a part or entire tooth replaced. In order for the fake tooth to function properly and stay in position, the doctor needs to drill deep into the gums, similar to a root canal. Then, metal rods are screwed into the tissue and jawbone to keep the fake tooth in place. Unfortunately, this isn't the only painful part of the procedure. Oftentimes, a damaged tooth or root system needs to be removed first, which can be excruciating once the Novocaine wears off. Next, the jawbone may need to be grafted to ensure the implant remains secured and resistant to other complications. During each dental implant operation, a needle will puncture the mouth to deliver an anesthetic, but before the drug kicks in, the patient will definitely feel a sharp prick. After that, the actual procedure can begin. These steps typically happen over the course of several visits, which means after each one, the mouth will ache. When the implant is secured and the anesthetic wears off, there's often a painful throbbing in the patient's gums and jaw. This is especially true when they need to eat. And although the patient can probably sustain themselves on a liquid or smoothie diet for a while, eventually they will need to go back to eating solid food. As the bone regrows around the implant and the nerves are repaired in the area, every bite after getting dental implants will be painful until the mouth is fully healed. The healing time can vary, but tends to take a week or two to recover completely. Our next spot involves extreme cutting and tearing in the most sensitive part of the body. Number 12. You probably have never heard of a myomectomy, but it can be an incredibly painful procedure that women sometimes need to have done. This surgery takes place in the uterus when fibroids need to be removed. Fibroids are non-cancerous growths that can cause discomfort and bleeding in the uterus. The specific methods of the operation to remove these growths vary, but since access to the uterus is required, the doctor needs to get inside of the sex organ. Normally, this is done by cutting into the abdomen. Once inside the reproductive system, the doctor will need to cut up the fibroids and remove them from the body. It should come as no surprise that cutting up growths within the uterus can be painful. But even worse is that oftentimes there are multiple fibroids that need to be removed. This means that each one needs to be sliced up and extracted. The patient can be put under general anesthesia or given local anesthesia depending on the number of fibroids, how big they are, and where they're located. However, the real pain begins when the anesthetic wears off. It is at this point that the patient will feel each cut and tear made into her reproductive system. As the body heals, there will likely be bleeding and some cramping in the region, along with constant pain. From start to finish, a myomectomy is a very painful procedure. Next, imagine having an entire bone cut out of your body. Number 11. Having a hip replaced is normally a procedure reserved for someone who is in excruciating pain due to arthritis or degeneration of the hip bone. This means having a hip replaced should alleviate pain, but unfortunately the surgery itself can oftentimes increase the pain exponentially until the hip is fully healed. Open hip surgery can take up to 3 hours to complete. The hip is not a small bone, which means the incision to gain access and replace it is larger than in most surgeries. After the skin and muscle is cut away from the hip, the bone itself needs to be removed. All of the damaged bone must be replaced by artificial materials. Depending on how much damage and degradation there is to the hip, a significant amount of bone might need to be removed. The pain associated with having parts of a bone cut off and then a prosthetic reattached can be extreme. The doctor may also need to smooth out the socket where the hip rests so it can rotate freely. This is done by the doctor taking what looks like an electric sander to the patient's bone and buffing it out. Again, this would not feel very good. Thankfully, the patient is asleep for the whole procedure. However, the recovery time for hip replacement surgery is long. It can take somewhere between 6 and 12 months for the patient to fully recover, and during this time, their replacement hip will ache and feel strained. Although the prosthetic is not technically part of the body, nerves, tissue, and muscle will regrow around it. As this happens, the body is literally rebuilding the connection severed and the damage done during the surgery. After months of physical therapy, the pain will lessen, but for those first several months as the body heals and gets used to the prosthetic hip, the patient will be in a lot of pain. Our next procedure is embarrassing, but also excruciating. Number 10. Hemorrhoids can definitely be painful, but the surgery to remove them can be even worse. This type of procedure is called a hemorrhoidectomy. It is done to remove infected tissue in the anal canal. This is much different from being probed or getting a colonoscopy. The doctor literally has to tear away tissue in the rectum to stop excessive bleeding. Hemorrhoids themselves are swollen veins similar to varicose veins, but located in the anus. This is where the whole procedure will take place, which means that it's not only painful but can be extremely uncomfortable. Unfortunately, in some situations, the hemorrhoids need to be stapled to block the blood flow in the region. This means that the veins in a patient's rectum might not only be sliced apart, but staples might need to be inserted into anal tissue. And for anyone who's ever accidentally stapled their finger, imagine that feeling happening to your anus. Next, we're going to be ripping flesh off from one part of the body and reattaching it elsewhere. Number 9. A skin graft is a procedure where a piece of skin from one area of the body is cut off and transplanted onto another part of the body. This is sometimes done with burn victims or after a major surgery that has damaged a lot of skin tissue. However, the procedure itself is not the only painful part of the skin graft. Maintaining the cleanliness of where the new skin is attached can be easier said than done. Bandages need to be constantly replaced, and if not done properly, there can be some nasty side effects. Since the patient is under general anesthesia and asleep when the actual procedure is happening, the pain doesn't occur until after they wake up. It is then that there will be two major areas of the body that will hurt. The first will be where the skin was removed from, and the second is the location where it's been stitched back on. However, it's the recovery process that really begins to take its toll on the pain receptors of the body. There's a chance the graft won't take, and the body will attack or destroy the skin that was surgically implanted. In this case, there would be pain from the immune system trying to destroy the skin. Skin grafts can also become infected, meaning that the transplant might inflame, and the area could feel as if it were slowly burning. burning. One of the most painful parts of a skin graft is when the bandages covering the operation site need to be cleaned or replaced. As the bandage is removed, there might be dried blood or pus that's connected it to the skin graft. If the bandage needs to be ripped off, some of the skin could go with it, causing pain to shoot through the area. Then, the cleaning agent to prevent the infection will get under the skin and activate the pain receptors, which just adds insult to injury. The worst part of the skin graft is that if the body rejects it or it does not heal properly, the patient may need to go through the procedure all over again. The next procedure is something most of you will have to endure sooner or later. Number 8. A lumbar puncture, also known as a spinal tap, can be a painful procedure. It consists of a doctor sticking a very large needle between the 3rd and 4th lumbar vertebrae in the back. The thought of a sharp needle being stuck through your skin and into your spinal cord is definitely a nerve-wracking one. The doctor then uses the syringe to suck cerebral spinal fluid from the subarachnoid space in the spine. The needle is not supposed to come into contact with any nerves or the spinal column itself. But accidents happen, and if the needle manages to tear through any bone or tissue, the pain will be excruciating. Regardless, even if the procedure goes 100% according to plan, the doctor will need to take somewhere between 5 and 20 milliliters of cerebrospinal fluid from the body. This means that the needle will be in the patient's back for a decent amount of time. And remember, this isn't just a pinprick. The needle has to be long enough to penetrate the skin, muscle, and slip its way into the spinal column. Most of the time, with a skilled physician, the patient will only feel a slight pressure in the lower back during a spinal tap. However, many patients also report feeling a searing pain, like a gigantic bee sting shooting up their spine. When this intense pain occurs, the first reaction of the body is to move and get away from whatever's hurting it. But this can cause even more pain during the procedure. If the patient moves unexpectedly, it could cause the needle to go into the nerves or scrape against the bones in the spinal column. In this scenario, there would be no escaping the pain. It would be intense and unrelenting. Nothing quite beats the pain of having organs ripped out of your body, though. Number 7. Gallbladder removal, or cholecystectomy, is when the organ responsible for collecting and storing bile is removed from the body. When the gallbladder is not working properly, it can cause a lot of problems and pain. Patients have reported feeling intense discomfort immediately upon waking up from the surgery. Considering they were just hacked into and had an organ carefully cut free of its blood vessels and other connective tissue, extreme pain isn't unsurprising. In open cholecystectomy, the surgeon creates several incisions, the largest of which is about 6 inches long. The procedure is done if someone needs to have gallstones removed from the gallbladder or to alleviate other problems that might be causing intense discomfort. In order for the gallbladder to be removed, it must first be separated from the liver and the small intestine. Although someone can live without a gallbladder, having it removed hurts a lot. The recovery time from the operation can last from just over a week to several weeks. After the body begins to heal, the pain subsides for many people. But just after the surgery, patients find that a lot of painkillers are needed to get through the first few days of recovery. Our next procedure involved stretching the most sensitive of body parts to extraordinary proportions. Number 6. Although not technically a surgery, the next procedure is probably the most common painful experience women go through in hospitals. There is no event in life that can cause as much joy and pain as childbirth. If the baby is born vaginally, the mother is in for a lot of suffering. However, in emergency situations, the baby may be extracted via a C-section. This is typically less painful, but the hours of labor beforehand will be filled with discomfort regardless of what type of birth the mother goes through. For women who give birth vaginally, it's like pushing a long watermelon out of their reproductive tract. Just to be clear, the birth canal is not the size of a watermelon, which means as the baby is pushed out of the body, it is forcing the opening to become larger and larger. Pushing anything out of your body that isn't urine or fecal matter is going to be painful. This is why any other type of pain can rarely come close to the pain felt during childbirth. But that's not the most painful thing a woman can experience with her reproductive organs. Number 5. An abdominal hysterectomy is a procedure used to literally scoop out part of the female's reproductive system. That's right, this surgery takes the entire uterus out of the patient's body. It's probably pretty obvious that having an entire organ removed would be painful, and if that organ is part of the reproductive system, it comes with an increased amount of pain. In order to remove the uterus, the doctor needs to cut open the abdomen and separate the organ from the rest of the reproductive system. Unfortunately, the uterus is connected to a lot of different structures, including ovaries, fallopian tubes, and the upper vagina. The blood vessels, ligaments, and connective tissue that support the organ also need to be severed in order to remove it. After all the cuts and punctures to the reproductive system, the uterus can finally be extracted and the patient can be stitched up. Even after the surgery, there will be bleeding from the vagina, and the pain of having the organ removed will be intense. The recovery time varies, but can take several weeks, all of which will be agonizing. The next spot on the list involves removing even larger amounts of organ from the body. Number 4. Similar to a hysterectomy, a proctocolectomy removes organs from the body. In this procedure, part of the large intestine, rectum, and anal canal are taken out of the patient. The surgery might be done to combat ulcerative colitis, bowel cancer, and some forms of Crohn's disease. In order to reach the organs that need to be removed, the doctor needs to cut open the patient's abdomen and separate the structures using surgical tools. Depending on the needs of the patient, the entire colon must be cut out. After the necessary parts are removed, the surgeon will reattach what remains. This means that after a proctocolectomy, things can get very messy. Patients need to be monitored to ensure they can have healthy bowel movements. At first, their stool will most likely be filled with blood, and every poop will be painful. Therefore, patients who go through the procedure don't eat solid food until the excretory system has had time to heal. Even still, going to the bathroom after a proctocolectomy can be just as painful as the surgery itself until the body fully heals. Now we're up in the top 3 most painful medical procedures, and this next procedure will make just standing up excruciating. Number 3. Open reduction internal fixation of the calcaneus is the fancy medical way to say surgery of the heel bone. Regardless of what you call it, this procedure may be one of the most painful experiences of someone's life. We don't necessarily associate the heel with being a very sensitive part of the body, but for anyone who's ever had a bad fall and shattered their heel, they know nothing could be further from the truth. The heel supports a lot of body weight, which means that it needs to be strong. However, it also means that if it's damaged, a lot of pressure is put on the injured part of the body. And since the bone is meant to be sturdy, repairing a damaged heel comes with a lot of pain. First, the doctor needs to cut through the skin, muscles, and tendons to access the heel bone. This means there's a chance that the nerves in the foot during surgery will be damaged. This will cause immense pain when the patient wakes up. Once the surgeon has a clear path to the bone and sees how bad the fracture is, decisions need to be made. In some cases, the only way to repair the heel is to put metal screws and plates in the foot. Imagine someone twisting a screw through your bone to secure a metal plate between broken pieces of it. This would be agonizing. But the worst part isn't over yet. Once the screws and plate have been put in place, the ligaments need to be reattached and the whole foot needs to be sewn up. Upon waking from an open surgery on the heel, patients have reported experiencing the worst pain of their life. And this is all before they start putting weight on it again. After the surgery, the patient will need to go through months of physical therapy where they will be applying pressure to the reconstructed heel. Hopefully, there will be no infections after the surgery, as this would cause the patient even more pain. Also, there is a slight chance that the screws and metal plates don't set right, meaning the doctor would need to cut open the foot and reset everything. This would result in the patient having to go through the open reduction internal fixation of the calcaneus surgery for a second time. We mentioned the spinal tap earlier in the list, but there is a procedure that's even more painful than having a needle shoved between your vertebrae. Number 2. There's few things less painful than having your spine fused together. People who have had degenerative diseases that affect the spine often need to have surgery to address the issue. A spinal fusion procedure is used to connect 2 or more vertebrae together to keep them in place. This procedure could require a bone graft, which in and of itself is notorious for being painful. The physician will take a piece of bone, normally from the hip, leg, or rib, and attach it to one of the vertebrae. The doctor might also realign and connect the spine using metal rods and screws. If this is the case, the pain can be excruciating due to the number of nerves running through this area of the body. The connection of the vertebrae needs to be precise, leaving very little room for error. This means the procedure is slow and meticulous, which is also how recovery will go. Unfortunately, the entire recovery process will not only be long, but agonizing as well. At our number 1 spot, we have a procedure that's not only excruciating, but will probably lead to even more painful procedures in the future. Number 1. The most painful medical procedure might be a bone marrow biopsy. The basic premise of this procedure is to extract marrow, which is the tissue inside of bones. What makes this procedure so painful is that the only way to extract the bone marrow is to pierce through the skin, muscle, and all the way through a bone. Bone marrow biopsies may be done to make sure the body is producing the right amount of blood or to diagnose certain types of cancer such as lymphoma and leukemia. Normally, the doctor will give a patient a local anesthetic, which means they'll be awake for the procedure. But even with the pain-dulling drug, the bone biopsy can be torture. The doctor will insert a hollow needle into the patient's body and into their bone. This will send massive amounts of pain signals to the brain. It's the combination of a needle penetrating deep into the body and the destruction of part of a bone that makes the biopsy so painful. Normally, the needle is stuck into the hip bone, so following the procedure, there can also be lingering soreness in the region. Who doesn't love a good horror story? There's nothing quite like the thrill that comes from hearing a truly terrifying tale or spooky story. But there's one kind of horror story that's almost too scary to contemplate. These horrible but true medical horror stories just might be scarier than the most terrifying ghost story or unsettling urban legend. When it comes to medical horror stories, doctors are the ultimate source. Even though they've seen it all, there are always stories that stick with them, especially the most gruesome ones. For one doctor, the most memorable horror story of his career happened decades ago, when he was still a resident, and it's stuck with him ever since. One night, this young doctor was the on-call resident for the intensive care unit. ICU patients are very sick, and there's a lot that can go wrong. He was the only doctor in the entire hospital that night who could respond to emergencies. It was just after 2 a.m., and the young resident had been up since 6 a.m. the previous day, so he decided to head to the on-call room to try and get in a quick nap. He had just laid down and closed his eyes when his pager went off. The resident knew that the ICU nurses were extremely good at their jobs and knew what they were doing, and that they only called at night when they really needed help. The resident rushed out of the on-call room and ran to the ICU, where he found a patient sitting up in bed, surrounded by nurses and holding a bucket that was half full of blood. The patient looked oddly serene and peaceful, but every few seconds he would violently throw up. And he wasn't throwing up vomit tinged with a bit of blood. He was vomiting what seemed like gallons of pure red blood. The resident knew immediately that the patient needed a central line, a larger type of IV that would allow the doctor and nurses to give him badly needed fluids. The problem was there was only one room in the ICU equipped to put in a central line. The resident left the room at a run, confirmed with the ICU staff that the other room was available, and rushed back to the patient's room to prepare to move him for the procedure. He was gone no more than 3 minutes, but when he got back, the patient's head was slumped over the bucket, which was now near to overflowing with blood. The patient was dead. In the few minutes that the resident was gone, the patient had vomited himself to death. The resident went on to have a long and successful career as a family doctor, but he never ever forgot that night and the incredible amount of blood that had come out of that patient's mouth. Doctors certainly have their fair share of medical horror stories, but experiencing a medical horror story as a patient and then being left to deal with the aftermath is a whole new level of terror. In 2016, at the Tokyo Medical University Hospital in Japan, a female patient was seriously injured following the outbreak of a spontaneous fire in the operating room while she was on the operating table. Hospital administrators were understandably horrified and vowed to get to the bottom of the mysterious fire, but their investigations turned up nothing. All of the operating equipment had been operating normally, there were no flammable materials nearby, and even a committee of outside experts brought in by the hospital was at a loss to explain how the fire started. Finally, investigators determined what they believed had caused the mysterious fire. According to their final report, the fire was caused by intestinal gases. That's right, the fire was started by an ill-timed fart. Investigators determined that the patient, who was having an operation on her cervix that involved the surgeons using a special laser, had farted during the surgery, and that the intestinal gases that leaked from her body were ignited by the surgeon's laser. Once aflame, the fire quickly spread to nearby surgical drapes, which burst into flames. The unfortunate patient was left with severe burns in her nether regions. The memory of combustible farts might be enough to turn some people off a surgery for life. But what if a medical procedure actually stole your memory? Going to the dentist is no treat, but for one British man, it was a true nightmare come to life. William, a devoted husband and father, was also a successful military man stationed in Germany when he went in for what was supposed to be a routine root canal. William's trip to the dentist would end up being anything but routine. As the dentist was in the middle of the procedure, inexplicably, William's memory completely disappeared. The dentist performing the surgery didn't notice anything was amiss until after the procedure was done, and William appeared confused and dazed. The dentist's office called William's wife to come get him, and he was rushed to the hospital, where he remained for a few days of observation. Although some of his mental fog and confusion disappeared, his memory didn't come back, though he could recall everything before the root canal perfectly. William was unable to form new memories that would last longer than 90 minutes of anything after the procedure. He remembers sitting down in the dentist's chair and getting a shot of anesthetic in the mouth, but after that, nothing. Doctors were stumped to explain William's memory loss. They initially thought that a bad reaction to the anesthesia might have caused a brain hemorrhage, but further tests couldn't find any evidence to prove the theory. William's scans also weren't typical for someone with anterograde amnesia, and a battery of psychological assessments showed that he was otherwise emotionally healthy. There have been other documented cases of spontaneous memory loss. No others have occurred in a dental chair, making William's case truly unique. William's life today is a stark reminder of just how little we actually know about how our memories work. His wife created a special note in his smartphone titled "Read First Thing" for William to read each morning to remind himself who he is and where and when. He has to be reminded daily that his son and daughter, who he remembers as small children, are now 18 and 21. William's case also shows how powerful emotion is in the formation of memories. The only new memory he's made in the last 15 years is of the highly emotional death of his father. He hopes he'll one day be able to remember his children's weddings and the birth of his grandchildren without a reminder, but for now, William's internal clock is stuck at 1:40 p.m. on March 14, 2005, right in the middle of his fateful root canal. Memory loss is not what you'd expect to get out of dental surgery, but what if you inherited a life-threatening illness of an organ donor? When a 42-year-old woman received a double lung transplant, she got more than just a new lease on life, she also inherited something from her organ donor. Her transplant surgery went off without complications, her recovery was smooth, and she was sent home to adjust to life with her new lungs. Nearly 7 months after the surgery, while the woman was attending a support group meeting for transplant survivors, she helped herself to a peanut butter cookie. Within moments, she felt short of breath, lightheaded, and itchy all over. Soon she was having trouble breathing and she rushed to the hospital, where tests confirmed she had a severe life-threatening allergy to peanuts. In hindsight, the woman realized that she had had 3 other minor allergic reactions in the months since her transplant surgery. She just didn't recognize them as allergic reactions since she never had issues with allergies before in her life. Turned out, though, that her lung donor had a peanut allergy. In fact, the 12-year-old had died of anaphylactic shock after eating peanuts. Experts aren't sure exactly how an allergy can be transferred between donors and recipients, but there have been a handful of other documented cases of transplant recipients inheriting their donors' allergies. Inheriting a medical condition from a stranger is certainly bizarre, but what if the very act of thinking could send you into violent seizures? In the 1980s, a 12-year-old English-Canadian boy discovered the world's greatest excuse for not doing your homework. Doing math caused him to have seizures. His family first noticed something was off when they were playing cards. Whenever the boy was tallying up his hand or trying to calculate the score, he would be struck by a seizure. His parents took him to countless specialists to get to the bottom of their son's strange seizures, and further study revealed that the boy's seizures were triggered whenever he did certain types of math. Whenever he tried to do some simple mental math, he would be blindsided by a seizure. Strangely, certain types of math triggered seizures more often than others. Multiplication and division usually triggered a seizure, but addition and subtraction were usually safe. The boy's doctors diagnosed him with epilepsia arithmeticus, an incredibly rare condition that only a handful of people have ever been diagnosed with. No word on whether he got a doctor's note to get out of math class. Math-causing seizures are bad enough, but what if after the most blissful moments in your life you suffered nothing but pure hell? A study in the Netherlands in 2002 aimed to get to the bottom of a strange and understudied affliction that was affecting a small percentage of men all over the world. These men were struggling with a host of uncomfortable symptoms, from itchy hives and swollen burning eyes, to nausea, an upset stomach and fatigue, to a runny nose and even trouble breathing. But the strangest thing about these symptoms was when they would strike. Symptoms would typically start within a half hour after the men had ejaculated. Seeing an underserved need, researchers jumped in to search for answers. Given the similarity between the men's symptoms and the symptoms of an allergic reaction, researchers wondered if the men might be allergic to something in their own bodies. They gave allergy tests to 45 men in the study, pricking them with a needle dipped in a diluted solution of the subject's own semen. 90% of the men in the study reacted to the diluted solution, and the diagnosis of post-orgasmic illness syndrome was born. Sadly, there's no cure for POIS, but a course of injections of the subject's own semen shows promise as an effective treatment, so there is hope. Sometimes a good scare can be just what the doctor ordered, but these horrifying but true medical horror stories just might be taking things too far. You definitely don't want to think about these stories before your next doctor's appointment. Before a medical drug makes its way into the market, it has to go through various stages of testing. This starts with a laboratory investigation, which might begin with lab-grown human cells and computer models. If the drug passes that test, then scientists move on to animal testing. If the drug gets the green light again, we bring in the humans. The drugs are tested on people in what we call clinical trials or drug studies. These trials might include healthy people or sick people. They can test a drug's effectiveness, side effects, or how the body absorbs it, bioavailability. The drug should already be safe, but there have been times that things went horribly wrong. That's what we'll talk about today in this episode of The Infographic Show, medical drug trials that turned into living nightmares. Before we get to the horror, let's first paint a picture of what medical trial might look like. They don't always create elephant men. Our last and most disturbing tale on this list. Let's say you're testing for bioavailability. Generally, you'll apply to do the test and then be asked to come in for an interview and some checks. If you pass, you're given a date and location where the study will take place. You'll likely be asked to fast just before you come in, not take drugs including alcohol, and possibly even grapefruit juice. All trials are different, but one man told us when he did trials in Montreal, Canada, that he would turn up to a center and then was told he would be a number as well as a name. He fondly remembers being number 17 during one trial. He said the center had a pool table, rooms with bunk beds, TVs, and game consoles. There were also books and magazines to read. Everyone had to eat the same food and finish the meal. All participants ate according to their number, and that's why everyone wanted to be number 1. After a while, he said everyone is peeing and pooing almost in line with their numbers. You can leave the study, but you won't usually get paid. He said being confined with other snoring, not always nice men can be challenging, and on his trials at least one day involving having 20+ blood draws. If you don't have a catheter, this can turn your arms black and blue. Many of the people were jobless and desperate. Some were musicians or writers, and others were actually medical students from Montreal's universities, he said. He got about $200 a day, and the longest trial he did was 2 separate runs of 5 days. So it's not a bad paycheck for doing nothing but playing games and reading. No one in his trial had a bad reaction to the drug, although he said there were heated arguments at times over the TV channel or someone's loud snoring, and some people fainted during the blood draws. Okay, so you get the picture. We'll start with some lighter stories and finish with 2006's horror trial that shook the world. All these are fairly recent cases, but going back to the past, we could certainly dig up some shocking tales, such as the testing of the drug thalidomide. If it kills monkeys. This recent trial that went wrong took place in France in 2006. It was so bad that the European Union decided it was time to create new laws that protected volunteers. The trial was said to have been bungled, and it led to the death of 1 man and brain damage of 4 more. A company called BioTrial was testing a compound called BIA 102474 that was being tested to cure a number of diseases. The volunteers at the trial at first did not suffer any serious side effects, but when their dose was increased, volunteer 2508 said his vision went blurry and he had headaches. We expected to see him come back, said one of the staff, so the trial continued. The man, a 49-year-old artist, was declared brain dead the next day. As for 3 of the 4 others that were sick, a doctor later said that even in the best situation, there will be an irreversible handicap. The payment was around $2,200 for 2 weeks. An investigation later revealed that several monkeys had died during pre-human testing, but this information was not in the study protocol report. Drug blindness. This story involves women taking part in a drug trial to improve eyesight. What happened was exactly the opposite. They lost their sight. The Independent in the UK called the 2017 drug trial botched. It certainly was. The US patients even had to pay $5,000 to take part. They were testing stem cell treatments to improve their eyesight as the aged women suffered from something called macular degeneration that can make some objects look blurry. They're now totally blind and unlikely to recover, an associate professor of clinical ophthalmology at the University of Miami told The Independent. Reports suggest the study was a kind of Wild West trial, with some experts saying it wasn't even founded on scientific evidence. The Independent writes the treatment involves combining fat tissue removed from the patient's abdomens with enzymes to obtain adipose-derived stem cells. That was mixed with blood and injected into the women's eyes. But the drug was injected into both eyes at once, which is a very fundamental mistake. They might have only lost one eye's sight had the test been done right. In all, the study was kind of a Dr. Frankenstein experiment according to experts, and the women now see nothing at all. Enlarged brains. This terrible tale happened in 2016 when 5 people died after testing a medicine called chimeric antigen receptor (CART) in the USA. The treatment was seen as possibly a miracle cure, which consisted of adding extra disease-fighting protein to a person's immune cells. All the people in the trial had leukemia and were hoping to be cured. The treatment was seen as a great breakthrough in medicine and even won prizes, but things went wrong during one trial. The company doing the trial admitted that an internal investigation revealed the patients had died due to severe cerebral edema. The worst thing is the trial continued as they thought they knew what had caused this brain swelling, and then in a subsequent trial more people died. CART therapy is still seen as a possible cure for cancer, although in 2017 during a French trial, we were told one patient died from multiple organ failure, probably triggered by neutropenic sepsis at day 15. We should add here that hundreds of people die each year in drug trials in the US and UK, thousands in India, but many of those people are already on death's door. That's certainly not always the case though, as you'll see. Pocket money. 19-year-old student Nicole Wan was a healthy young girl who took part in a medical trial in 1996 to earn a bit of extra cash to pay the bills and have some fun. She would have got $150 for taking part in a trial at the University of Rochester Medical Center in New York State. The New York Times wrote that the researchers had violated their own guidelines by giving the girl an increased amount of anesthetic lidocaine. The test was to see what effect pollution had on her respiratory system, and that involved having a tube inserted into her lungs. For that, you must have a local anesthetic, as without it, it would be mightily uncomfortable. The Times wrote at the time, she never told her parents, a restaurant worker and a seamstress who are immigrants from Hong Kong and live in Queens. Because she was given so much anesthetic, after the study the young woman started to feel weak and had a lot of pain. 2 days later, her heart stopped and she died. She was coughing and having difficulty, the doctor told the Times. So they kept spritzing more lidocaine down her throat, he said. Reports also state the girl had not known exactly the kind of test she would be going through. The Elephant Man trial. Finally, we come to perhaps the scariest story in drug study history. What we know about anyway. It happened in the UK in 2006 at London's Northwick Park Hospital. 8 very healthy young men would be given an experimental immune system drug called TGN 1412 for the treatment of leukemia. After taking the drugs, things turned very dark for 6 of them. 2 lucky others took the placebos. The story sounds like something from a horror movie. It was all manic. Everything was happening all at once. They were vomiting. They were screaming in pain. People fainting, said one BBC documentary on the disaster. As the men's organs failed and their temperatures rocketed, their bodies also swelled in the extreme. Some reports say their heads almost doubled in size, hence Elephant Man trial. No one knew what happened. This was a mystery. We had no way of predicting how severe it was going to get. There was no rule book for how to deal with this, one doctor later said. One man told The Guardian, "I started shouting, 'Doctor, this pain is killing me, do something.'" He recalled the placebo takers were happily reading books, although some reports say they were later horrified by what they saw. The Guardian writes that one man suffered heart, liver, and kidney failure, pneumonia, septicemia, and frostbite-like symptoms that resulted in his toes and sections of his feet being amputated and several fingertips falling off. They were all rushed to intensive care and the trial was declared by police a crime scene. Amazingly, they all survived, but what happened to them may mean they don't live long lives. They're all still alive today though. We imagine they got their $2,500 for the trial and at least one of them claimed millions in compensation. Although one medical website writes, the long-term effects on their immune systems remain unknown, though on discharge some were warned they may suffer an increased risk of cancers and autoimmune diseases. A bit of advice if you're going to do a drug trial. Be sure to do your research. Is the drug new? Are you the first to test it? That's a matter of importance. You definitely don't want to end up needing to rely on dangerous drug trials to make ends meet. We've come a long way in understanding how our bodies work. However, there are still mysteries yet to be explained. Why do you yawn? What is the appendix actually for? Why do only men find farts funny? We're going to talk about 20 things your body does that we don't know why, and as we go through our list, things are going to get stranger and stranger. Starting with number 20, we're going to talk about boobs. There are a few attributes for male and female breasts that we don't quite understand. For example, all mammals have some form of breasts. This is because mammals tend to take care of their young after they're born. Breasts are effective delivery devices for feeding a young infant. However, only human females have enlarged breasts even when they're not rearing offspring. This is extremely strange because in the evolutionary scheme of things, having constantly large breasts can be an inconvenience, get in the way, and may even send the wrong signals. Most people think that the permanently large breasts of human females actually attract men. However, in many cultures, men do not find large breasts attractive, so this seems unlikely. Another theory is that the constantly large breasts of human females may have to do with the large brains of human offspring. It's thought that the hormones created in the breasts promote fat storage that gets released into the milk, when the mother breastfeeds, making the milk extra nutritious. This has not been proven yet, so as of right now, we have no idea why human females have enlarged breasts throughout their life. And speaking of boobs, number 19 has to do with male breasts. We don't fully understand why males have nipples at all. Think about it. Nipples are used as a way for babies to suckle milk from the mother's breasts. Since males can't produce milk, there's no reason for them to have nipples. All the male nipple really does is confuse the baby if they start sucking on it and nothing comes out. Hopefully you're still excited to learn more about what we don't know about our own bodies. But if at this point you're yawning, then you're already ahead of the game. Number 18 on our list is, why do we yawn? We don't know. We do know that yawning tends to occur when we're tired or bored. We might start to yawn when we see others doing it. In fact, I bet since you've heard the word yawn a few times already, you might even be doing this mysterious act right now. And if not, I bet you're definitely holding in a yawn. But what's the purpose of yawning? Originally, scientists thought yawning was a way to get more oxygen to the brain and therefore make the body less tired. But this does not seem to be the case. A more recent research might suggest that yawning is a way to cool off the brain. The yawn circulates cooler blood up to the brain to help lower the temperature in the skull. This is still being researched and many scientists disagree with the idea, but at least it is one explanation for why we yawn. Other scientists suggest yawning is a form of communication. This is why when one person yawns, people around them start to as well. Long ago, in humans' ancient past, yawning may have been a way to signal to the group that it was time to rest. If everyone was yawning and felt tired, then it was time to stop. There is always safety in numbers, and contagious yawns may have been a way to keep the group together. Number 17 is another form of contagious behavior that we don't quite understand. Laughing. We laugh when something is funny, or maybe if we're extremely uncomfortable, but why do we do this? Laughing may have the same root cause as yawning, in the sense that it's a way to make sure a group of people are on the same page. It has been hypothesized that the reason we laugh and that laughter is contagious because humans are social creatures. We want to fit in with the group, and laughter may be a form of empathy to connect with others in a social setting. When we laugh, our brain releases endorphins, which makes us feel at ease. So, we don't know exactly why we laugh, but it makes us feel good, especially in social groups. However, this does not explain why we sometimes laugh when we're all alone, or why you might just get the giggles when you think of a past funny experience. Maybe laughing is just a way for your body to boost morale and make itself feel better. Number 16 is an action your body does that is connected to your emotions. You may be a little embarrassed when we tell you about this one. When you blush, your face turns red. We know how it turns red, but we have no idea why it happens. The reddening of the face that's connected to blushing happens when the capillaries near the surface of the skin expand and let more blood rush through the area. However, this does not explain why our body makes this happen. One reason might be to serve as an identifying factor for liars. If someone in your social group is lying, they might blush, and if they get caught, it could cause them to blush even more. It's been suggested that most likely reason for blushing occurs as a social cue. Interestingly, research has shown that blushing is a positive behavior in social interactions. Maybe this is because people who blush may be considered more trustworthy since they have such an obvious tell if they're lying. Charles Darwin even called blushing the most peculiar and most human of all expressions, because even though we can explain how blushing occurs, we really have no idea why our bodies do it. This brings us to something our body does that seems so simple, yet is shrouded in mystery. Number 15 on our list is, why do we sleep? At a basic level, we might just assume our body needs sleep so we can rest. But our body can rest without falling asleep. So why do we sleep at all? Almost every animal sleeps in some form, whether it's short naps or long stretches at night. This process seems important to all animals. But why is it necessary? When you think about it, falling asleep is really dangerous if you live somewhere there are predators trying to hunt and eat you. When you sleep, you're unaware and vulnerable. So it would stand to reason that natural selection would eventually get rid of this dangerous process, but that hasn't been the case. Most scientists think sleep is a way to recharge the brain and allow the body to build up stores of energy. It may also be a way for us to transfer information and memories into different parts of the brain. It's even been suggested that sleep is necessary to bring brain cells back to a baseline state so that the brain doesn't overload. However, the fact remains that we are not entirely sure why we sleep. And for number 14, we're going to take things one step further. Why do you dream? If sleep may be used to reset your brain cells, why does your brain then create vivid stories for you to experience while you sleep? Again, we don't actually know why our bodies do this. It has been proposed that dreams are the way your brain regulates mood or catalogs the events of the day. On the other hand, some scientists suggest that dreams are just an accidental side effect of your neurons firing. We spend up to a third of our lives sleeping and dreaming, yet we do not know actually why. For number 13, we're going to talk about how weak you are. You may be offended, but it's not just you, it's all humans. The human body is surprisingly weak when compared to our closest relatives. If you put a chimpanzee and a human next to each other, you would see more similarities than differences. We share over 98% of our DNA with chimps, so on a biological level, we are absolutely more similar than different. But when we look at the strength of a chimp versus that of a human, we are so much weaker. Our bodies have most of the same muscles, but chimps' bodies are 3 times stronger than ours. And the crazy thing is, we just don't know why we are such weaklings. It may have to do with the way our muscles attach to each other. In the wild, an 85-pound chimp was seen easily snapping branches from an ironwood tree with their fingertips. However, when a human tried to do the same thing using both of their hands, they couldn't break that very same type of branch. It is still a mystery why our bodies are so embarrassingly weak when compared to our closest relatives. And talking about hands, number 12 has to do with our body having a peculiar trait in these appendages. It is unclear why humans have a dominant hand at all. The vast majority of humans are right-handed, but why? And what does that say about left-handed people? Many scientists think it has something to do with the speech center of the brain. This is found in the left hemisphere, which controls the right side of the body. There may be a connection between speech and having a dominant hand, but other research shows that not all right-handed people control their speech from the left hemisphere. So what it comes down to is we have no idea why our body has a dominant hand. There's also no explanation for number 11 on our list. Why do we have fingerprints? Yes, they are unique, and yes, they can be used to identify someone, but what function do they serve? For a long time, we thought that our fingerprints helped us grip things, but this has been shown to not be the case. It's been suggested that maybe the fingerprints allow us to have more sensitivity when touching things, but this has not been proven yet. As of right now, we'll just have to accept that our hands are still somewhat of a mystery to us. As we get into the top 10 things we don't understand about your body, things are going to get pretty out there. You are definitely special, and besides fingerprints, there are other differences between you and every other human on the planet. For example, why do humans have so many different eye colors? We know that the color of your eyes is determined by your genes and the pigments that are created by the cells in your eyes. But why do we need blues, greens, browns, or a combination of these colors? Maybe it's just to make our eyes pretty. But we really don't know why eye color is so varied. This goes for number 9 on our list as well. Why do we have different blood types? It would be much more convenient for doctors and medical professionals if we all had the same blood type, but this is not the case. It is true that some blood types are more resistant to certain infections than others. Therefore, one type of blood may have been beneficial in a certain part of the world and a different type might have been better adapted to another. Since humans evolved in Africa and spread across the globe, different blood types may have been a byproduct of the process of natural selection for different environments, but we aren't 100% sure. Continuing with your special characteristics, number 8 and 7 have to do with the hair, or lack thereof, on your body. Hair color varies greatly, but there is something else about hair we don't quite understand. Why do we need it on our bodies at all? Hair on the head and face definitely serve a purpose, but what about body hair? We do not grow enough body hair to make a significant difference in temperature regulation. At one point in our distant past, humans had much more body hair, which would keep us warm or help in cooling us off, but today it's hard to find someone with enough body hair to make that much of a difference. If you lost all of your hair tomorrow, you wouldn't miss it. Well, at least not in terms of any biological reasons, so we don't exactly know why we still grow body hair. This brings us inside of your body for number 6 on the list. You have trillions of little creatures living inside you right now. In fact, the microbes in your body may outnumber your own cells about 10 to 1. That's crazy. We know that some of the bacteria in your body helps you with digestion and other life functions, but this is just a small percentage of the whole. So why does your body allow trillions of microbes to live within it? We don't know. The study of the human microbiome is a relatively new field, and we are still learning. But for right now, you're home to an entire ecosystem of microbes, and we have no idea why most of them are there. And now we hope you're ready for number 5, which is a little gross when you think about it, so hopefully you didn't just eat a big meal. We don't actually know how all those microbes got inside you in the first place. You were definitely born with some, and you pick up others through food, water, and even the air you breathe. But everyone's microbiome is different. So how does your body gather its unique group of microbes? No one really knows. However, when you sleep with someone, you are probably swapping more than just pleasure and bodily fluids. You're also exchanging microbes. Think about that next time you hook up with someone. You probably heard of number 4 on our list. It's commonly thought that your appendix serves no purpose. You may even be in the 1 in 15 people who have had their appendix removed. So why does your body even have the organ? Some scientists think it's just a vestigial structure left over from our evolutionary ancestors. Others believe that it still serves a function in the development of the fetus, or is useful for producing certain proteins and hormones that could be beneficial to our bodies. But the fact that you can live without it begs the question, why is it even there? We honestly don't know why. This brings us to the end of our list. Our last 3 unexplained phenomena in your body come from the same place, the brain. To start us off, we have no idea how the brain actually works. We know there are trillions of neural connections that work together to keep you alive and allow you to watch the insanely interesting videos put out by the infographic show. But really, we don't know how the brain actually functions as a whole. The brain is made up of atoms and molecules just like everything else in the universe, yet it is the only thing we know of that can control a body, think, and even dream. Number 2 on our list is that we don't know how your brain allows you to react and move with ease. No one can explain how your brain is able to move billions of cells in an instant. Also, how do the chemical reactions that keep you alive and moving on a day-to-day basis even occur? Doing something as simple as typing a few words into a computer requires massive amounts of signals from your brain to your fingers. You also need your eyes to see and send information about where the buttons are. All of that information is fed to the brain, which must then interpret it and send out new signals in a split second. We have no idea how your brain can make your body do exactly what you want in only tenths of a second. Finally, we're at the end of our list of things your body does that we just don't understand, and we're going to get pretty metaphysical. What makes you, you? Well, your DNA is responsible for your traits, but your consciousness is responsible for who you are and your personality. How does your body create consciousness? We have absolutely no idea. It probably comes from the brain, but we aren't even 100% sure of that. You could go down a deep, dark rabbit hole trying to figure out what consciousness is, where it comes from, and why your body creates it, or you could just chalk it up to being something else your body does that we don't yet understand. They can cause jaw pain, skin issues, unexpected injuries, and even emergency surgeries. They're your organs, and they can be a pain. But at least they're working hard to keep you alive, right? Not exactly. The human body has a surprising number of vestigial organs, body parts left over from an earlier point in evolution that no longer serve a purpose. Here are some of those organs and body parts that really aren't pulling their weight anymore. Let's start with one that's most obvious in babies. Have you ever touched a little baby's palm, only to be surprised when the baby immediately tightens its grip on your finger? It's weird that this is one of the first controlled motions the baby exhibits, or so it seems. It's actually a reflex, stimulated by tendons in the palm, and it can even be seen in utero as early as 16 weeks into gestation. It continues until the baby starts developing fine motor skills several months after being born. So, why is this such a key reflex for infants? Biologists have been studying it for a while and believed it originated in primate species with more fur, like chimpanzees. The reflex allows the infant to grip onto the mother's fur without being directly carried, so the mom can forage. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle is mostly gone for humans, and mom is more likely to carry the baby in a stroller these days. So all this reflex does is make it easier for the baby to grab onto your hair. This next vestigial trait is the bane of teenagers everywhere. Normally, teeth can be a good thing. You keep them clean, and in exchange, they let you tear into some corn on the cob. But some teeth are more trouble than they're worth. The wisdom teeth are the last teeth to emerge, usually coming in during the teen years and early adulthood. Most people have 4 of them, but some have fewer or none. When they come out, there can be trouble. They can be impacted, cause pain and infections, and if they do emerge, they can crowd other teeth and be hard to clean. More often than not, wisdom teeth get pulled. So why does our jaw even bother? Wisdom teeth are large, powerful molars, and in the old days, having more molars was helpful. After all, the average primordial human diet consisted of raw meat and tough fibrous plants. You needed some power to rip through those. Now you don't really need that jaw force to get through your Big Mac and fries. Not only are the wisdom teeth less necessary, but the average size of the human jaw has shrunk, meaning no room for them to come in comfortably. For this next vestigial organ, it's all in the wrist. Try touching the pads of your 4th finger and thumb. Does a line appear when you flex your wrist? If so, you're only one of roughly 85% of humans who still have the palmaris longus muscle. This body part is so useless that a lot of people have evolved out of having it altogether, and those who do have it won't get much use out of it. While it can be found in many of our common relatives like gorillas and chimpanzees, they also don't seem to have much use for it. So is it actually good for anything? Biologists suspect that it was used more before opposable thumbs evolved in the primate world, and it just kinda stuck around since then. The only difference between those who have it and those who don't is that those without it have slightly lower pinch strength, but the effect is so minor that it's frequently removed and used in those who need tendon grafts in another part of their body. This next one might just give you goosebumps. The body has a lot of different muscles, but these are among the smallest in the human body. They are the erector pili muscles, and they control the movement of the hair follicles, and that means they can make your hair stand stand on end. They are most commonly reflected in goosebumps, those weird little skin bumps that you get when you're too cold or too nervous about something. So these muscles are definitely still working, but they're not all that helpful and can be more annoying than anything. But in other animals, it's a very different story. Humans don't have too much body hair, so there isn't much for the erector pili muscles to do. But in animals with a much thicker fur coating, having their hair stand on end can be helpful. If they're moving into a tight space, their hair extending can help warn them of danger before it hits their skin. And if they're trying to scare an enemy or impress a potential mate, they can puff out their hair to look more impressive. Now that might be useful when that one guy cuts in line at the coffee shop, but alas, humans aren't built that way. And it's not the only area of the body where animals have the edge on us. Have you ever watched your cat or a dog when they notice something? One of the first things that happens is their ears start twitching toward the source of the noise. It's cute and should immediately be posted on YouTube, but it's also useful to them as they can point their ears toward the source of their surprise and hear better. They use the tiny muscles called the auricular muscles to manipulate their ears, and humans have 3 of these muscles too. Our versions are much less useful. 2 of the 3 auricular muscles in humans are pretty useless, but one, the anterior auricular muscle, has a subtle effect. It can draw part of the upper ear up and forward. The human ear has evolved to provide a pretty good listening experience regardless of where you're standing, so we don't need to shift our ears with these muscles. However, being able to wiggle your ears is a pretty good party trick. This next organ is either the stuff of life or just some extra skin. It's one thing virtually all mammals have in common: nipples. In female mammals, they're attached to breast tissue that provides vital milk for their young. Some animals have long rows of nipples, but humans only have 2, and all humans have 2, even though men don't really seem to need them. Male nipples are usually flat, not attached to milk-producing organs, and seem to provide no evolutionary purpose. So why haven't they been eliminated by evolution yet? Some schoolyard bullies would probably say because to do so would eliminate the purple nurple, but scientists sent them to detention and provided an alternative theory. Males and females start from the same genetic base, and the foundation of the nipples in the fetus actually comes before the point in development where it's determined whether the future baby will be a boy or a girl. These remnants of fetal development don't provide a vital function, but they do hold a bundle of sensitive nerves that can cause arousal. A lot of vestigial organs are about protection, even when it's not needed anymore. It's a weird little quirk of the eyes. What's that little lump of tissue in the corner where it meets your nose? Not only does it seem to not fulfill any purpose, but it's one of the first places in the eye to get irritated by allergies or smoke. The only use it seems to have is making your eyes water more and to make it more obvious when your eyes are getting red. In animals, though, it's a very different story. Are you ready to meet your third eyelid? Humans have 2 eyelids, the more flexible top one and the protective bottom one. But many animals, including birds and reptiles, have a third layer called the nictitating membrane that can be drawn over the eye for extra protection. Few mammals still have it, but they do have the base it evolved from, that little corner of eye tissue. Only one primate, a small loris from the rainforests of West Africa, still kept this unique eye feature functional. Some organs come from a much older primal time. The human body has a number of sense organs that control our senses of sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. But one smell organ isn't what it used to be. Jacobson's organ, or the vomeronasal organ, is a tiny organ located in the nasal cavity and can be found in all snakes and lizards. Some mammals, like dogs, cats, and pigs, have it too, and humans often have a vestigial organ based on it. But don't get too excited, it's not good for much. Wait, why do the animals get all the secret smells? Jacobson's organ is designed to detect specific chemical compounds, particularly those coming from predators and prey. It's also useful for detecting sex pheromones from potential mates. In other words, it's useful for wild animals who live their lives by primal functions of hunting, being hunted, and looking to reproduce. Humans haven't been living that way for a very long time, and so this organ is out of work. Just because an organ isn't useful doesn't mean it can't be painful. It takes up much of the lower legs and can be the bane of runners everywhere. The plantaris muscle. This long superficial muscle is the longest tendon in the human body and runs all the way from the knee joint to the heel, and for all that length its function is weak flexion of the ankle joint and the knee. It might also help the central nervous system perceive where the foot is positioned, but its overall function to the body is minimal, so it may cause more trouble than it's worth. The plantaris muscle is susceptible to injury caused by too much pressure on one leg. Tennis, basketball, and soccer players often suffer ruptures that can take some time to heal, although the injury to the muscle doesn't cause long-term damage to physical ability that tearing other tendons or muscles can. The tendon can be removed and used for tendon transplants, and scientists believe it's more useful in and other primates who commonly grip things with their feet. This next organ might be funny to say, but it's not essential for life. Spleen! This organ resembles a large lymph node and mostly works as a blood filter. Its name comes from ancient Greece, and it removes old red blood cells, stores blood, and recycles iron into the blood. It also provides a home for lymphocytes packed with antibodies, which boosts the immune system. It's a helpful organ and can be found in all vertebrates, but it's also delicate. So, what happens if something goes wrong? The spleen is prone to rupture when injured and usually has to be removed. Immune system disorders can also affect the spleen's function, and if that happens, don't worry, the body has you covered. There can be some deficits in the immune system as a result, but the liver takes over most of the spleen's function. People without a spleen can live a long, healthy life and probably have to deal with chuckles when they tell people which organ they're missing. But it's more useful than this next organ. It's all in the name. The appendix. It's a small tube attached near the colon, and it's one of the most common causes of early childhood surgeries. If the appendix gets inflamed or infected, it can cause severe stomach pains. If left untreated, it can burst, a life-threatening condition that sends dangerous bacteria through the body. Today, the appendix can be removed safely and quickly, but in the past, it was a common cause of death. And for all that trouble, what does the appendix actually do? Well, for a long time, people thought the answer was nothing. It was just a random body part that didn't help until it randomly tried to kill you. Today, scientists believe nothing is without its purpose, and the appendix is essentially a storage tube packed with beneficial gut bacteria that help your digestive health. It's useful, but not necessary. Millions of people have had their appendix removed, and none of them seem to have any long-term health issues. Finally, here's something that's a remnant of a much older time: the tailbone, or coccyx, probably the most annoying bone in the body. The last part of the vertebral column in apes and humans. It's a pointy bone that you don't usually notice until you fall on it the wrong way. Then it reminds you of its existence with a painful jolt. If fractured, it can cause difficulty walking for a long time and force you to wander around with a donut-shaped cushion to sit on. Awkward. But ages ago, it served a very different purpose. The coccyx is a short, stubby thing in humans today, but in our ancestors it was longer, a lot longer. The coccyx is our vestigial tail, the last trace of when we were swinging around in the trees and using our tails to hold onto branches. Today it's mostly useless, although it does provide attachments to various other muscles and tendons in the area. But it's a far cry from its former self. It would be kind of useful to have a tail you could hold a cup of coffee with. The male body. What a wonder of engineering it is. It contains half the genetic information needed to reproduce and continue civilization. It can produce milk but has useless nipples, and it has the uncanny ability to get an erection at the absolute worst of times. Prepare to be fascinated. Number 50. Male fetuses actually get erections while they're in the womb. And while no one can be absolutely sure why it happens, some reports state it's just to keep the thing healthy. Number 49. Men also have a G-spot. You can find it by pressing on your prostate. For reference, that's about 2 inches from the entrance of your anus. Number 48. Men over 50 might start growing breasts. This is due to the anomalous hormone production that happens as we age. Number 47. It differs from man to man, but in general, a healthy guy will ejaculate 40 million sperm in one go. Still, a man could produce anything up to 200 million sperm each time. You heard that right. That's more people than live in most countries. Number 46. According to one study that was published in the U.S. National Institutes of Health, the member of an American male had an average size of 5.1 to 5.5 inches when fully erect. The study didn't mention how it got its volunteers stimulated in order to measure them at their fullest, but it did confirm the sizes were professionally measured, not self-reported, so there was no room for the men to lie. Number 45. Nationality doesn't impact the size of your member. The conclusion in one study consisted of over 15,000 men from across the world was that the average penis size was 5.17 inches. Genetic factors have a much bigger influence according to a paper by the Nature journal. But does size even matter? Number 44. Studies have shown that if it's a one-night thing, women on average like a larger phallus, with research showing that they prefer a penis around 6.3 inches in length and 4.8 inches around, which, as you know, is larger than the average. But did size correlate with pleasure? We also looked at anecdotal accounts from women, and as you'd expect, every woman had her unique take on the penis. The consensus was that there had to be a balance, not too long and not too short, with one woman saying, "He had these moves that compensated for his size. Small penises aren't bad at all, if the man knows how to use it." Okay, one last thing about your precious product down there. Number 43. We've all heard about growers versus showers, but is there any truth to it? A study by Healthline showed that 26% of men are growers, with the rest being showers. This is because of a person-to-person difference in how much collagen there is in the penis, which is genetic. The amount of collagen might mean you're a grower or a shower. The amount of blood flow may also make a difference. What's hilarious is that at the bottom of the article, Horrifying explained how men can measure their penis from the base of the shaft, of course, but they also gave this important bit of advice: just don't do it in public. Now, a special mention not to the penis but to the bulge. Number 42. Throughout history, there's been a preference for a smaller penis, but in cultures, a big one was a sign of greater manhood. For example, in Norse mythology, there is a proud reference to a man whose bratwurst is almost as big as a horse's. Alright, now for some fast-fire facts. Number 41. Men typically have darker hair than women, with one reason being their higher levels of melanin. Number 40. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine said around 40% of men are chronic snorers, but only 24% of women habitually make that noise from hell. Number 39. You might have heard that if he has large feet, then his member will be large too, but this is just another myth in a long list of myths when it comes to the penis. Number 38. Semen is not just a load of sperm. According to one scientist's website, it also contains citric acid, free amino acids, fructose, enzymes, phosphorylcholine, prostaglandin, potassium, and zinc. Number 37. Men tend to have a faster metabolism. Due to the fact that they usually have more muscle than women, that means that even if they're just sitting around, they'll be burning more calories. But are men's and women's brains different? Number 36. If you say that men and women have different brains, you run the risk of being accused of neurosexism. We don't want that to happen to us, but we did read some scientific articles that told us that some parts of the brain might be different in the sexes. Some research says because of the different brain structures, men might be better on average at completing spatial and motor tasks. At the same time, though, women might be better at learning languages and expressing emotions. Remember, though, not all scientists agree on this. Number 35. On average, a man might have 3 to 5 erections every night while he's sleeping, and some of the erections might last as long as 30 minutes. This might have nothing to do with a wet dream or the fact that he's just cozied up closer to his lover. It's a natural phenomenon that scientists call nocturnal penile tumescence. We imagine some of you guys out there have on occasions woken up in the morning and felt something very stiff down there. Or perhaps your girlfriend has stood back in shock and said, "Oh dear, whatever could that be in your pajama pocket?" Morning wood is absolutely normal. The reason it happens down there is something called the parasympathetic nervous system. It can be stimulated at night since it doesn't switch off during sleep. But why it happens during the night is something science isn't so sure about. Number 34. If you don't get any stiffies throughout the night, there might be a problem. In fact, one study said 52% of grown men experience some kind of erectile dysfunction, with it happening more when men pass the age of 40. Still, a study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine said 26% of men under 40 also experience erectile dysfunction. The main culprits are booze and drugs in the short term, but in the longer term, diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, obesity, depression, and anxiety can all affect the ability to make the man stand to attention and stay that way for a useful amount of time. Number 33. In a study titled Prevalence of Pubic Hair Grooming-Related Injuries, it was said that 25% of groomers reported an injury, but this study also included female groomers. How bad can the injury be? Number 32. The absolute worst thing we could find related to cutting and shaving injuries down there was something called Fournier gangrene. Simply put, if there really was hell in this world, then this disease would be Satan's proudest achievement. It's described as a necrotic infection of the scrotum or catastrophic gangrene of the penis, and in some cases, it's happened when someone has nicked their scrotum while grooming. Thankfully, it is very rare. Amen to that. Number 31. A gastroenterologist working at Princeton named Anish Sheth wrote an entire book on poo, from what colors mean to how solid they are. He also wrote about something he called poophoria, which is when a person has an orgasm while dropping the kids off at a pool. He said for some people it can be like having a religious experience due to it feeling so good. He said that this kind of stool high is related to the vagus nerve being stimulated, adding the stool high is relatively safe, but can become an addiction for some. Number 30. Did you know that men have thicker skin than women? They do, and it's because of testosterone. In fact, one study showed that on average, men had 10 to 20% thicker skin. This can also be good news to some vain men, because this is one reason why many healthy men don't age as fast as women. How you age, though, is obviously partly determined by your genes and, more importantly, all the environmental factors the skin experiences over the years. Alright, now we'll settle that argument between you and your partner, if you're in a male-female relationship, that is. Number 29. Have you ever been in a room with someone of the opposite sex and one of you is arguing that it's too warm or too cold, but you are wearing similar types of clothes? One reason for that is that men generally are warmer than women. One doctor explained it like this. Since women have a lower metabolic rate, they tend to produce less heat than men do, which makes them feel colder. Sometimes the difference is quite startling, with one health website writing, "Some studies have shown that while men feel comfortable in rooms with a thermostat set to 72 degrees, women tend to feel comfortable in rooms with a thermostat set to 77. Now we'll ask the question, what on earth is that thing that some people call man flu? Number 28. According to an article in the British Medical Journey, some scientists believe that man flu is nothing but man whining. The paper said despite the universally high incidence and prevalence of viral respiratory illness, no scientific review has examined whether the term man flu is appropriately defined or just an ingrained pejorative term with no scientific basis. It's a long paper, but the upshot was that a man's antibody response to the flu could be inferior to a woman's. The paper also highlighted the fact that more men end up in the hospital with the flu, and their bout of the sickness on average lasts longer. This is ongoing research, but there is a possibility that the man is not a wimp and might actually be experiencing a higher level of suffering. Now let's talk about man nips. Number 27. Men in theory can produce milk. That's because their bodies make the hormone oxytocin and prolactin, which are responsible for milk production. Men also have milk ducts, so milk can in theory come out. That means that given the right circumstances, a man could breastfeed. In fact, this is something recorded throughout history. Even the Greek philosopher named Aristotle said men could produce milk if they squeezed their breasts enough. Later in the 19th century, a book called Anomalies and Curiosities of Medicine talked about some real-life cases of men giving their own milk to babies. Although these cases are not verified, it could, as we say, happen in theory, but a man's hormone levels would have to be through the roof. Number 26. You might also not know that for a time, young males might have female-looking breasts. A researcher interviewed by the Scientific American said, actually, a significant number of boys around the age of puberty do develop breasts, so the tissue is there, but it regresses. It's a condition called gynecomastia and is related to a hormone imbalance. The good news is that things usually balance and the boy breasts go. That's not always the case though. A man named Merle Yost wrote a book about growing up with breasts where he recounted his years of bullying at school and his final jump to get breast reduction surgery at the age of 33. Number 25. In general, men have less body fat than women. It's thought the reason for women having more body fat is an evolutionary adaptation related to them being able to have children. Number 24. A paper published in the U.S. National Institutes of Health had this to say about male and female natural differences. The results showed that the male teeth were consistently larger than the female teeth. But why? Number 23. It's not always the case, but it's thought that it has something to do with men having more dentine in the crowns of their teeth. Dentine is one of the tissues that make up a tooth. The other parts are the enamel, cementum, and pulp. Now, let's try and settle that old age debate on pain thresholds. Do men feel more pain than women? Number 22. You might have heard this before, with people telling you that women have a higher threshold of pain due to the fact that she's evolved to go through childbirth. The thing is, though, pain is subjective, so it's still hard to measure. In studies where men and women have been subjected to the same pain stimuli, it seems men had a higher pain threshold. The study is actually more complicated as it does take into account that culturally men are expected to not express pain. Number 21. You might also have heard that men have fewer ribs than women. That is utter balderdash, although some people might not have the standard 12 pairs of ribs. Number 20. In some studies, it's written that women generally find men with high testosterone levels more attractive. The good news for all you single guys out there is that single men tend to have higher levels than men who are already with a partner. Number 19. A man's testosterone levels might go up and down within a day, but some men do have higher levels in general. There's also something called irritable male syndrome, which could account for men becoming grumpier in old age because their testosterone levels drop. But as you'll now see, men can get very old and still do the business in the bed. Number 18. There's no age limit for men being able to produce sperm and make a baby. In 2010, it was reported that a guy in India named Ramajit Raghav just had a kid. He was 94. He didn't give up either, having another child just 2 years later. When asked about his secret, he told the British media, "I've been a vegetarian all my life, and I credit my stamina and virility to the diet of vegetables and grains. Being a vegetarian is the secret to my strength and good health." He died in 2020, aged 104. Number 17. Still, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine says male sperm is of a higher quality while men are under the age of 40. In fact, sperm donors are usually asked to be under that age. Number 16. This is one reason why when there's an age gap in a male-to-female relationship, the older person is more often the man. Sure, there are lots of other things to take into account, such as the woman liking a settled-down man who's more likely to be faithful, have money, etc. But one simple fact is some men like younger women because a younger woman from an evolutionary perspective can still procreate. Number 15. Going bald might be some men's worst nightmare, but is it really that bad? Many studies have shown that women like bald men. Trust us, when it comes to being attractive, there are many things that come before your hair. Plus, if you're so insecure and lacking in confidence, well, she might think you're too vain or too weak. In one study, it showed 44% of women were attracted to bald men, but those women were aged 35 to 44. Just 19% of women aged 18 to 24 liked bald guys. Some studies have shown that some women perceive bald men as being more dominant, more masculine, and more successful. Number 14. Studies have shown half of all men will show some amount of male pattern baldness by the time they're 50. Usually it's down to genetics and is related to sex hormones called androgens. Number 13. As we said, this usually starts happening as a man matures, but there are some cases of teenagers going bald naturally. The Guardian talked to a guy named Sam Wolfson. He said he was 16 when his hair started thinning, and then by the time he was in his early 20s, he had only some wispy fuzz on top and 2 bushes at the sides. That's a bit sad, so let's talk about orgasms again. Number 12. The male orgasm is different from a woman's. Guys shoot their load and it seems after that someone has taken all the air out of them. They're like a sex doll that's just been burst. Women, though, have longer orgasms and they're often ready to go again right away. Teen males tend to have more forceful ejaculations, so it's in these years when a guy might fire someplace where he never thought he could reach. What usually comes out is 2 to 5 cubic centimeters of sperm. That's enough to fill a teaspoon at 5 cc's. As for how much in one sitting, it depends on many things such as genetics, mood, prior absence from ejaculating, lifestyle, and general health. In terms of how many rounds men can go, young folks could possibly squeeze out 5 sessions, but older people would likely not go that far. Number 11. With the male orgasm, there's something often called the point of no return. This is called ejaculatory inevitability, and it means the semen's already started making its way to the urethra and is about to experience liftoff. At this point, there will be a series of contractions of the penile muscles and the location of the base of the anus. The pelvis might also start the thrust. Those nerves that have caused the contraction send messages to the brain and everything feels good. Number 10. Before all that happens, a man will need to be aroused. Messages are sent from his spinal cord, and this makes his member stiffen. During this period, he might also let out some liquid from his urethra. This is called pre-ejaculatory fluid, and it's there to affect the pH balance in the urethra. This helps the survival of the sperm to come, but it doesn't contain sperm itself. Once the job is done, the male goes through what scientists call a refractory period. It's basically downtime before he's ready to go again. In a young man, it could be just 10 minutes, but in an older guy, it'll usually be hours. Number 9. Your sperm needs your semen, remember the whole bundle, to get to the egg. Without the rest of the ingredients, it wouldn't get very far at all. But if sperm does take off, it can live inside the woman for up to around 5 days. If it lands somewhere it isn't intended, well, it can only live for a few minutes. Number 8. If you're wondering if you could take a look at sperm, you can't. It's about 1/500th of an inch long, which is around 10,000 times smaller than the egg it wants to meet. Under a microscope, the sperm meeting the egg looks like a tiny spacecraft landing on a vast planet. Number 7. When a woman is ovulating, men can actually pick up on that just by smelling her. Ovulation is when a woman's egg is matured and so has been sent off by the ovary and down the fallopian tubes, where it can wait for one of those lucky sperms to make contact. Number 6. Okay, so what would you think if you read this start to the research paper? Individuals in some species prefer mates carrying dissimilar genes at the major histocompatibility complex, MHC, which may function to increase the MHC or overall heterozygosity of progeny. Yup, that's a bit of a mouthful. What the paper is saying is that women can detect dissimilar genes in men, so by choosing them, their offspring might be healthier. We bet you never thought about that as you moved your stool in the pub closer to a woman. But it gets even more complex. Number 5. Talking to CNN, a scientist said that the egg itself might be able to attract the right kind of sperm. He said human eggs release chemicals called chemoattractants, which leave a sort of chemical breadcrumb trail that sperm use to find unfertilized eggs. Now let's move away from sperm. Number 4. Did you know that guys in general see fewer shades of color? We'll let a scientist explain why. She said this is because retinal cones are on the X chromosome, which men only have one of. Men, however, have more testosterone in their visual cortexes, meaning they sense brightness better than women. Number 3. Something you probably thought we would have talked about already is the male nipple. What's the point of it? The reason men have nipples is that when the embryo is forming, males and females are pretty much the same. They share the same blueprint, which is the reason all humans look alike in terms of basic structure. But after around 7 weeks of gestation, the gene of the Y chromosome makes some changes and the testes start to form. It's then that little bundle of blood starts producing testosterone. But that doesn't mean the nipples have to go. What would be the point in losing them? They aren't doing anyone any harm. Number 2. Another thing men might not need is that thing we call foreskin. After all, in some cultures they get rid of it. Is that the right thing to do? In a paper called Vital or Vestigial, the foreskin has its fans and foes, the writer cites some scientists who have called the foreskin the floppy disk of the male anatomy, meaning it is no longer needed. If you think about it, men have very long time ago might have wanted to walk around with the penis hanging out, and that can mean some damage being caused to this Jonah Hill. This is really bad news in evolutionary terms because the only real reason we're here is to make other people, so the foreskin acted as a protective shield. It could also act as a lubricant back then and now. Number 1. This is personal. When the writer was a kid, he kept hearing boys talk about their balls dropping, as if one day those things just went plop and fell down. It never happened, but his balls looked fine as they were. Still, he was concerned. For many kids waiting for their balls to drop, it can be quite worrying if nothing seems to be happening. Actually, there is no sudden drop at all when the child is already grown. Balls don't really drop. They're tight to the body for sure when men are younger, and then when a boy matures and he produces more testosterone, his balls get larger, and it might seem like they're lower at that point. The female body is full of mysteries. From having a self-cleaning reproductive system to using more of the brain when making decisions, women have men beat in a number of unique ways. You're about to learn things that will amaze you, shock you, and gross you out. Number 50. On average, men might be stronger than women, but female muscles are definitely more resilient. Research has shown that muscles in the female body not only stay stronger for longer compared to men, but they can also recover from damage more rapidly. Women also don't tire quite as fast as men, meaning that they can go harder for longer. Basically, the female body evolved to be a high-endurance machine capable of doing incredible things. Number 49. Not only do women's muscles last longer than males, but they tend to live longer as well. This is because their bodies are built to withstand extreme trauma from childbirth and protecting their young. On average, women live between 5 to 6 years longer than men. Some scientists think this is because they take better care of their bodies and typically choose healthier lifestyles. However, women have also evolved to be extremely tough, as a large number of healthy, strong females is vital to the survival of the species. But lifestyle isn't the only factor that contributes to female longevity. There's something even crazier about the female body that gives them a higher life expectancy. Number 48. The female immune system is a force to be reckoned with. Studies show that the female immune system is more powerful than their male equivalent. One reason for this might be because they need to protect a developing fetus for 9 months before giving birth. Having a strong immune system that's able to destroy pathogens before they can harm the baby is essential, although females have a higher rate of autoimmune diseases, which might also be linked to their active immune systems. There's a surprising way that females can boost their immune system even more, and it has to do with sex. Number 47. Recent studies have found that female immune systems can increase in efficiency if they have more sex. It was uncovered that women who have sex 2 to 3 times a week have 30% more IgA antibodies in their blood than people who did not have sex. IgA antibodies are one of the first lines of defense against foreign invaders and can be found in the mucus lining of the nose and airways. So, sex can give additional protection to the body, meaning the carnal act has other benefits besides just feeling good. And speaking of sex, the female body has an organ that's sole function is to provide pleasure. Number 46. The clitoris has one purpose and one purpose only: to provide the female with sexual satisfaction. There is no other organ in males or females that can claim the honor of only functioning as a pleasure center. Number 45. The clitoris and penis are analogous structures. This is not super surprising when you think about it, since we all start off as a single cell and then develop more or less in the same way. However, if a fetus contains the instructions to become female, the genitalia cells will differentiate into a clitoris. Conversely, those same cells will become a penis if the fetus is programmed to become a male. Now, we're gonna stick with the clitoris for a little while, as it's an incredible organ. Number 44. The clitoris continues to grow throughout a female's life. By the time a woman reaches menopause, her clitoris is around 3 to 4 times larger than when she started puberty. This is fascinating because since the clitoris is responsible for pleasure, some scientists have hypothesized that a larger clitoris might play a role in more orgasms or at least more sexual satisfaction in mature women. The thought is that the larger the clitoris, the easier it is to stimulate. Number 43. And speaking of stimulation, around 75% of women report that it is the stimulation of the clitoris that makes them orgasm, not the intercourse itself. Let's step away from the female reproductive system for the moment and focus on another pleasure center of the body. Number 42. Some women have reported that they're able to achieve orgasms just from the stimulation of their nipples. A study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine found that when the nipples are played with, the genital sensory cortex part of the brain becomes excited. This is the same region of the brain that's known to become active when a female is sexually satisfied through the clitoris or vagina. The research suggests that the nipples should not be neglected during sexy time, as they can provide women with a significant amount of pleasure. Number 41. What's even crazier is that the part of the brain which is aroused during sex and sexual stimulation can also be aroused when a female thinks about food. This is especially true when they have cravings connected to their menstrual cycles or pregnancy. It's funny to think about how the stimulation a partner gives a female can be replaced with some chocolate or a juicy steak. It begs the question if women really need men at all. Number 40. One breast is always larger than the other. Normally, the size difference is barely noticeable, but every female has a slight difference in size between their two boobs. There doesn't seem to be a pattern into which breast is bigger, but on average, the left breast usually is larger than the right. The size discrepancy varies from female to female, but it's improbable that a female will have two breasts of identical size and shape. What makes someone biologically female? The answer to this question may be more complicated than you realize. Number 39. A main indicator of whether someone is biologically female is their sex chromosomes. There are two different sex chromosomes, X and Y. Females have two X chromosomes, while males have an X and a Y chromosome. However, it's possible for a female to also have an X and a Y chromosome. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, half of the resulting cell's chromosomes come from a mom and half from the dad. If dad passes on a Y chromosome, the baby will be biologically male unless there's a missing section of the transferred Y chromosome, known as the SRY gene. This is the portion of the DNA responsible for developing male traits such as the penis. If the SRY gene is missing or damaged on the Y chromosome, the cells will revert to their default setting, creating a female. When the SRY gene is turned off, testosterone is not released, and the amount needed to cause the cells to differentiate into a male body. This makes it possible for a female to have XY sex chromosomes. Circadian rhythms are what help our bodies regulate its day-to-day processes, but the female body has a surprisingly long cycle. Number 38. Women tend to go to bed and wake up earlier than men. There's a biological reason for this. The female circadian rhythm tends to be slightly faster than males. The biological day for a female is around 6 minutes shorter than for males, which is why they tend to go to sleep and wake up earlier. There doesn't seem to be much benefit to this, but it might explain why more women report having insomnia than men. Over time, this discrepancy between a female's inner clock and the 24-hour day can really start to affect them negatively. Some women who have circadian rhythms that run extra fast struggle to stay awake and focus throughout the day because their body is telling them to go to sleep even if the sun is up. This can also lead to restless nights and sleep deprivation. There's no doubt women are strong, yet they cry more often than males do. This is not because they are more emotional, but because of the size of their tear ducts. Number 37. Adult women cry about 5 times more a month than men do. Women's tear glands are actually anatomically different than men's. They tend to be larger and have a different biochemical makeup, which leads to females crying more often than males. Also, women produce around 50% more prolactin in their bodies than males do, which is a hormone that regulates lactation. This molecule also plays a role in the production of tears. It is the higher levels of prolactin and the biological differences in their tear ducts that are probably responsible for females crying more often than males. Not that they're more emotional. In fact, many studies suggest females are more level-headed than men and are able to cope with emotional stress better. The vagina is a surprisingly hostile place, yet there are creatures living in there even though it's acidic. Number 36. The pH level in the vagina is around 4.5, which makes the vaginal environment around the same acidity as wine and coffee. This is not the ideal environment for many creatures, which is one of the defense mechanisms the vagina has against foreign invaders. However, there are a plethora of microbes that call the vagina home. Number 35. A group of acid-producing bacteria called lactobacillus find the vagina a great place to live. In fact, they even help maintain high levels of acidity so they can thrive. This in turn keeps other bacteria that can cause yeast and other types of infections away. Without a vaginal microbiome, a female's reproductive system would be much more prone to diseases caused by harmful pathogens. Number 34. The female reproductive system isn't just damaging to pathogens, it can also make the sperm's job very difficult. Almost every single sperm out of the millions ejaculated into a female during intercourse die before reaching the egg. This is why getting pregnant for some women can be so difficult. Sperm are hardy and can last up to 5 days in the female reproductive system, but more often than not, the hostile environment inside the female's reproductive tract kills them within hours. There are other creepy creatures that the female body seems to have an adverse effect to, besides microbes and sperm. Number 33. Researchers at Carnegie Mellon University conducted a study where they gauged the reactions of human babies when they were shown pictures of a human face versus a spider. What they found was that female babies spent more time looking at human faces than spiders. Males, on the other hand, spent about the same time looking at both. This might suggest that the female brain has evolved a natural awareness that those creatures can be harmful and should be kept away from. This is evolutionarily beneficial as females are much more vital to the continuation of the species than males are. If a male gets bit by a poisonous spider, he can still provide sperm even as he's dying. If a female gets bit by a poisonous spider while pregnant, it could harm the offspring. Number 32. Unfortunately for females, they are much more likely to suffer than males. This is because the pain that females feel is more intense. Scientists aren't sure why this is, but it might have to do with hormones in the female body. It's been hypothesized that estrogen can dampen the body's painkiller signals, which then amplifies the pain itself. This could explain why females feel more severe pain even if the affliction is the same for both sexes. Pain can even be amplified further by the female body in this next situation. Number 31. Women need to plan ahead when looking into getting a root canal, otherwise their bodies could turn against them. Estrogen not only dampens painkiller signals, but it can cause dry sockets in the mouth when there are high amounts of the hormone in the body. If a dry socket becomes infected, it's reported to be one of the most painful experiences of someone's life. One way to avoid this catastrophe is to schedule dental work when the estrogen levels are lowest in the body. This is typically in the last week of the menstrual cycle. Number 30. What do human females and sharks have in common? They both produce a compound called squalene. In females, this molecule helps keep the vagina lubricated. In sharks, squalene is found in the liver. Although human females produce the same compound, we use shark squalene in moisturizers and skin creams. It acts as an emollient, which moistens the skin. This isn't surprising as it does the same thing for the vagina. Surprisingly, scientists at the American Cancer Society have found that the squalene from sharks can also help reduce the effects of chemotherapy on normal human cells. It does this without inhibiting the chemotherapy drug's effect on the cancerous cells. Scientists aren't quite sure why this is, but more research is being done. Number 29. Sometimes women find that hair is clogging the shower drain. This isn't surprising as their pubic hair only lasts around 3 weeks before falling out. When compared to the life cycle of hair on the head, this is an incredibly short amount of time. So when cleaning the drain, there's a good chance that some of that hair being pulled out is from the pubic region. Men can typically drink more alcohol than women. We're not sure that that's something to be proud of, but the reason why has surprisingly little to do with body type. Number 28. Most females can't drink as much as males of a similar size because they produce less of the necessary stomach enzymes used to break down ethanol. This leads to higher intoxication levels as more and more ethanol gets into the bloodstream and circulates around the body. The result is that females tend to get drunker quicker than most males do. Another downside to drinking alcohol as a female is that hangovers can be worse than for males. This is because the female body contains lower percentage of water than the opposite sex, which causes worse dehydration, nausea, and headaches after drinking too much alcohol. Number 27. It may sound crazy, but some females are born with not just one but two uteruses. As the fetus develops, the uterus starts as two separate tubes. Over time, they join together to create one large organ. However, sometimes a condition called uterus didelphys occurs and a female is born with two separate uterus. In unique circumstances, a second vagina might form as well. This creates a forked path within the body to the uteruses. Number 26. The uterus is an amazing organ. It's incredibly elastic as it needs to stretch out a lot during pregnancy. How much does it stretch, you might be wondering? Normally, the uterus is only around 4 to 5 inches long. However, during gestation, it can grow many times that size. In fact, the uterus can extend all the way up to the belly button around 20 weeks into pregnancy. The midsection of a female is full of tightly packed organs. This is exacerbated by the fact that there is a part of the digestive tract which is extra long in their bodies. Number 25. The female body probably didn't need to have anything else crammed into its midsection, but part of the colon, called the sigmoid, is longer in women than men. This is the end of the large intestine where fecal matter is stored until the waste is ready to leave the body. Theoretically, this means that if a female held in their bowel movement, which we definitely don't recommend, they could have larger poops than a man. Number 24. Everyone poops, even females. Number 23. Having all of the reproductive organs and the extra portion of the sigmoid in the midsection means that there's not much room for expansion. Everything is squeezed into such a small space that the female body digests food and gas builds up. It can cause abdominal distress. This is just a fancy way of saying that females get more frequent stomach aches and release more gas after eating due to the limited space for expansion. There is one fascinating fact about the female reproductive organ that seems almost unbelievable. Number 22. Females are born with all of the eggs they will ever have already in their ovaries. Around 6 to 7 million oocytes, or unformed eggs, are created during development. But when a female baby is born, she normally ends up with closer to 1.2 million eggs in her ovaries. As she ages, more and more eggs are destroyed and their remnants are absorbed back into the body. By the time a female reaches puberty, she has around 400,000 eggs. Then, when menopause occurs, there are about 1,000 eggs left in her ovaries. The menstrual cycle occurs when an egg leaves the ovary and is not fertilized. When this happens, there's bleeding, but not as much as you might think. Number 21. Everyone's body is different. Some females lose more blood than others during their menstrual cycle. However, on average, women lose around 4 tablespoons each month due to their period. It's important to note that some females bleed a lot more than that, as they might have a heavier flow. Number 20. A female's period does not just cause pain in the midsection, but can actually mess with the brain as well. The pain associated with the menstrual cycle causes the brain to lose focus. Research has shown that this can hinder a female's ability to do complex tasks while the body is trying to mitigate the pain from cramps and the shedding of the uterine lining. But worry not. Even when a female's brain is distracted, they still have a leg up on men. Number 19. In studies conducted around memory and the ability to retain information, women between the ages of 45 and 55 perform better in almost every category. Even more impressive is this study was conducted while the females were going through menopause, which is known to negatively affect memory recall. Yet, women still remember things better than men, who had no biological excuse for their low scores. This means that throughout a female's life, she will likely be able to recall and remember things much better than the males around her. Number 18. Females have a strong connection between the two hemispheres of their brain. When given a difficult task to solve, research has shown that women use many parts of their brain simultaneously rather than just sticking to one portion. Men, on the other hand, over-engage a single section of their brain. This means that women might combine both logic and intuition when problem-solving, allowing them to think up better solutions more quickly than the opposite sex. Number 17. There is no denying that women are better multitaskers than men. A possible reason for this was published in the Journal of Neuroscience. The section of the brain called the corpus callosum makes sure that both hemispheres are communicating with one another. The female corpus callosum is larger than the male's, which is theorized to be one of the main reasons why women can multitask with such high efficiency. Females have some unique abilities when it comes to their senses. It's often said that women are much more perceptive than men, and there's a biological reason for this. Number 16. The gene that allows people to see the color red is only found on the X chromosome. This means that unlike males, females have 2 of these genes. The researchers have found that a combination of a normal gene for seeing red and a mutated one allows females to see a broader spectrum of red-orange colors than males. The fact that males only have 1 copy of this gene also explains why more men are red colorblind than women. Females are also better at differentiating color hues in the yellow-green spectrum, which means they literally see the world differently than men do. Number 15. Both women and men have the same ability to sense smells. However, women can learn to detect a particular scent much better than men can. This ability develops during a woman's childbearing years, and research at Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia has shown that women can smell certain aromas at 1/1000th of their original concentration. This likely has to do with hormones that are present in the body, somehow making the olfactory neurons more sensitive. Might sound crazy, but females can even sense when their partner is stressed just by smelling the body odor of their shirt. And this isn't the only sense that females have the upper hand in. Number 14. Females have more taste buds on their tongues than males. This means that they have the ability to taste more flavors that might be hidden in food than men. It's also hypothesized that extra taste buds give females more sensitive, sophisticated palates. Number 13. Women can experience multiple orgasms during sex. Once a male's orgasmed, he has to wait for his refractory period to end before he can climax again. Females don't have this problem, they can just keep going and going. And this brings us to a mysterious part of the female reproductive system, the G-spot. Number 12. There's a belief that a magical portion of the female sex organ can cause an incredibly intense and pleasurable orgasm when stimulated. This has become known as the G-spot. The original name for this region was the Grafenberg zone, named after Ernst Grafenberg, the German physician who proposed the area existed. As of yet, there has been no actual proof that a G-spot exists. The best guess of what the G-spot could be as of right now is that it's an internal extension of the clitoris. However, many doctors doubt it exists at all. Another myth of the female body that needs to be debunked also has to do with sex, or the lack thereof. Number 11. For centuries and even today, many people believe that the hymen needs to be intact for a female to be considered a virgin. This is absolutely not true. The hymen is a thin layer of tissue that's located just inside the vagina. It's flexible but not very strong, meaning that physical activities such as biking, horseback riding, or even inserting a tampon can stretch or tear the hymen. Just because a female's hymen is broken does not mean she's had sex. Although this next female fact might seem messy, it's actually part of the natural cleaning process. Number 10. The female reproductive system will sometimes release discharge without warning. This can stain underwear, but it's a natural process the body needs to make sure the vagina remains clean and infection-free. Number 9. The vagina is full of folds and rugae, which are a series of ridges created by the folding of tissue. The reason that the female body needs to create discharge and why it's so important for the vagina to remain clean is because microbes can find refuge in these folds. The ridges are caused by an increase in estrogen that thickens the vaginal tissue. After menopause or while a woman is nursing a newborn, she produces less estrogen, and this causes the folds to flatten out and the entire vagina to become thinner and drier. Number 8. The reduction of estrogen in the female body might result in women in the later stages of life experiencing discomfort during sex. Luckily, with a little bit of lube and patience, the side effects that low estrogen levels have on the vagina can be mitigated during sexual intercourse. Number 7. Women lose collagen at a faster rate than men do. This can lead to more wrinkles in the skin. However, numerous studies have shown that even though men retain more collagen, they look older than women of the same age. This is likely because men tend not to take care of their skin and their body as well as females do. The other reason for this has to do with skin thickness. Number 6. Women's skin is thinner than men's skin on average. This means that the female body shows fewer facial lines and aging spots. It might also account for why some women feel colder than men do, even while the temperature around them is the same. Are females actually more flexible than males? And if so, why? Number 5. The female body contains more elastin than the male body. Elastin is a protein that allows connective tissues to stretch. The fact that the female body contains more of this protein means that they're indeed more flexible than men. On top of that, females tend to have a wider pelvis that gives them a more extensive range of motion. What time of year do women crave sex more? Number 4. Surprisingly, the answer to this question isn't wintertime when it's cold and you're stuck inside. Instead, investigations have found that women actually crave sex more during the summer. Researchers think the reason for this is because of the scents that are present during this time of year. As discussed earlier, females have a strong sense of smell and are able to recall scents better than men. It's not exactly known which smells trigger the female drive of sex, but whatever they are, they appear to be more plentiful in the summer. Another factor that might explain this phenomena is that sunlight helps activate serotonin in the body, which is a key neurotransmitter that allows humans to experience pleasure. Therefore, if the summer sun causes the female body to want to be pleased, it might cause them to seek out one of the more gratifying experiences in life. Number 3. Regardless of the time of year, women are better at identifying sexual intentions than men are. Both sexes tend to miss cues of sexually interested individuals from time to time, but women are much better at identifying the difference between a friendly interaction and one that has other connotations. This means that in the game of finding a mate, females will likely have much more success than males, as they will miss fewer opportunities. And if that last fact got your heart racing, it's nothing compared to our next insane fact about the female body. Number 2. The female heart beats faster than a male heart. This is because a female heart tends to be smaller even when compared to similar body size. To make up for the smaller dimensions, female hearts beat more frequently to ensure enough blood is circulated around the body. The average male heart beats around 70 to 72 beats per minute, while the female heart beats around 78 to 82 beats per minute. Number 1. Females don't need males or their sperm to reproduce anymore. Using in vitro fertilization and other assistive pregnancy methods, 2 females can combine their genetic information and have a baby. However, 2 sperm will never be able to be combined to create a viable offspring, since an egg is essential for an embryo to form. This means that females might not have any use for males in the future. Now watch Lady Death, World's Deadliest Female Sniper, or check out Female vs. Male Prison. How do they compare?